suit leak checks to make sure their spacesuits are working properly, and we got a good confirmation of that. The closeout lead verified the cabin environment was good, and they all exited or I should say egressed the spacecraft and began their procedures to close the side hatch of the Dragon spacecraft. If you've been watching us since we came on the air at 9:10 a.m. Eastern Time, I'm NASA's Daryl Nail with NASA astronaut Zena Cardman, and we're providing you audio commentary right now, but we will expand our live coverage around 12 p.m. Eastern when we will come on camera and invite additional commentators to walk us through today's launch and ascent.
It's going to be a really exciting day here. We're a little over 2 hours from launch, and I am just so excited to be here with you, Daryl. This is a crew I know really well. I'm excited to watch them launch to the International Space Station today.
And we couldn't be happier to have you, Zena, here as well. You trained with this crew, you know this crew, and you have great insight, and we appreciate you sharing that with the audience.
Absolutely, yeah. These two especially feel like not only colleagues, but family and friends. We've been working really hard together for about the last year and a half, getting ready for this mission. And as we've said before, it takes a huge team of people to make a space flight like this happen. I'm proud to be one of them.
And Dragon, we're doing final photo verifications on the side hatch seals. We'll let you know when we're stepping into side hatch closure.
Freedom copies, thanks.
I think one of the hardest parts for crew at this point in the countdown to launch is just waiting.
Waiting.
Yep. Yeah, you'll see some crews play games amongst themselves, almost like road trip games.
Thomas Pesquet, he was, I remember during his launch, and the number escapes me, but they were playing some games.
I remember training with Crew 4 and playing some word games with them.
Yeah.
Try to guess your crewmates to guess the word, almost taboo style.
There's some waves from our crew.
Waving goodbye to their closeout team, and this is...
There they go.
And Dragon, side hatch is coming closed. Expect a state machine transition to that hatch close shortly.
A big moment during the launch countdown.
Freedom copies.
And that state machine transition that they mention is the flight computer state on board the Dragon. So that software is transitioning now to a state where the vehicle knows its side hatch is closed.
What does it feel like and what does it sound like when they close that hatch?
It's really difficult to hear the hatch itself closing. At this point, the crew are in their suits with their visors down and their earpieces are in. And so you really are getting only muffled sounds from the outside world.
Do you get like a little pressure change? You know, when you seal something up like that
Yeah,
sometimes?
you know, not that I have actually noticed. Not significant enough to make my ears notice.
Okay. As they're working to secure that hatch, let's talk a little bit about the crew. And we'll start with Nick Hague. He's a U.S. Space Force colonel, and he is the Crew-9 commander today. He was selected by NASA as an astronaut in 2013. This will be his second space flight to the International Space Station. In 2018, he and his Soyuz crewmate experienced a catastrophic rocket booster malfunction after launch. They were forced to abort but landed safely. 5 months later, Hague launched on another Soyuz and served as flight engineer for Expeditions 59 and 60. He spent a total of 203 days in space and performed 3 spacewalks. The Kansas native is a test pilot and a distinguished graduate of the United States Air Force Academy. Nick spent 5 months in Iraq in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. He voluntarily transferred from the United States Air Force to the U.S. Space Force in 2021 and is an active colonel. His wife, Katie, is a retired U.S. Air Force colonel, and they have 2 sons.
Absolutely. Nick is an amazingly qualified astronaut. He's brilliant. He basically taught orbital dynamics, actually, at the Academy. So he's quite smart, but he's also incredibly kind, a really thoughtful teammate. He's the kind of person when you're out doing some training in the field in a very cold winter environment who is up late boiling water so that his teammates can have a hot thermos before they go to bed.
Oh, wow.
Really thoughtful teammate. I absolutely loved
Dragon, we are commencing health checks for the launch escape system. Expect a momentary state change followed by a transition back to pad hatch closed.
Okay. Progressing along
And
nicely.
Freedom copies. Thanks for the heads up.
It's an expected call from the core, the communicator Shiva in Hawthorne. I really loved doing spacewalk training with Nick. He's a veteran of multiple spacewalks, and so for myself, a rookie of both spaceflight and spacewalks, it was incredibly valuable to get to train with him. He's the kind of person where if you have stored one of your bits for one of the tools in a difficult to reach location and you're sitting there struggling, he's just reaching over and helping you retrieve it and has put it on your tool before you can even think to complain out loud. Exactly.
Wow.
Great teammate.
And in this configuration today, he has a lot to be thinking about, to your point there. He is commander, but he's also does not have a pilot per se. He has a fellow crewmate, mission specialist, who's sitting in the pilot seat, but he's not trained to be a pilot today. So more responsibility is on Nick in this position.
Yeah, that's exactly right. He's really in a mindset today of being both spacecraft commander and pilot. Aleksandr Gorbunov, our crewmate there, who would normally be sitting in the seat all the way to your left, is moved over. We specifically wanted him at the displays so that he can help Nick monitor and be value added as able. But it takes, as you know, many months of training to be fully qualified as a pilot. And so Nick is taking on a lot of responsibility today. He is well qualified for the job.
Speaking of Gorbunov, he is our mission specialist today and a first-time flyer. So Nick will get to see his reaction as he goes into space for the first time. He studied engineering with qualifications in spacecraft and upper stages from the Moscow Aviation Institute. Gorbunov graduated from the military department with a specialty in operation and repair of aircraft, helicopters, and aircraft engines. Before his cosmonaut selection in 2018, he worked as an engineer for a rocket space corporation and helped support cargo spacecraft launches from the Baikonur Cosmodrome.
Alex is a brilliant engineer. He's always got really insightful questions. I've loved getting to train with him, especially because he has experience with other types of spacecraft.
And knows a lot about it.
Absolutely. Yes, he was trained in the mission specialist role. He was always very engaged, asking thoughtful questions, keeping track of procedures.
One note on that storm that we were telling you about that is now here. You can see it on your screen there, and the raindrops hitting the lens. So it is raining at the launch site right now. It's
some classic Florida weather for you.
It certainly is. Engulfed
nice and sunny before. Here we are.
That's right. And we're expected to bounce back and forth between rain and calm conditions, according to the launch weather officer. So this was not unexpected. It was part of the probability of violation. You can even see the raindrops falling past the crew access arm. So the pad's getting a nice dousing, a nice soaking out there, but not to worry about any of the hardware out there. The rain itself is not an issue. So far, there haven't been any lightning strikes detected in this cell that is currently over top of us, so that's good. But it is moving. It's moving about 20 knots to the northeast. It passed over Florida on its way to us. And we've heard the SpaceX launch director communicating with our launch weather officer for today, Brian Cizik, about this storm. So they've been tracking it the whole way. And it's worth noting, even as we're getting a little rain, that as once hurricane, has now been downgraded, Hurricane Helene passed over a few days ago, it left this, which is a stalled boundary over the middle of the state of Florida. And you can see there, it's really bubbling up to the southwest and then funneling over top of us. We're expecting spotty showers off and on through the rest of this countdown. But what is really going to matter is, excuse me, what the weather is at just before T-minus 35 minutes, so around the T-minus 50 to 45 mark, where they'll look at this weather and be able to predict whether or not there will be storms at T0. At this point, it's a little tough to call, but here's a wider view of the weather out here at the Cape.
Yeah, with really patchy weather like this, it can be hard to predict exactly what's going to be right over your rocket at T0. So we will keep our fingers crossed for today, but of course our goal is to launch when it is safe to launch. So we will be keeping an eye on this weather as we get closer to T0 just over 2 hours from now.
We're currently at T-minus 2 hours and 2 minutes and counting until the liftoff of NASA's SpaceX Crew-9 mission. We have one astronaut and one cosmonaut inside of Dragon Freedom, atop a Falcon 9 rocket from Space Launch Complex 40 at the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. They are headed to the International Space Station to help maintain the orbiting lab as well as conduct science, critical science that benefits all of us. Both Nick Hague and Aleksandr Gorbunov will launch as Crew-9 and then join flight engineers Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams and others to become members of Expedition 72 once on board the International Space Station. There you can see the complete Crew-9 crew. Again, once on board the International Space Station, they will conduct plenty of science experiments, research, technology demonstrations, and perform maintenance activities. We kick things off here at a little after 9 a.m. Eastern Time. Just a couple hours ago. And we've had a real smooth countdown so far. The astronauts woke up. They were treated to a light breakfast. And they got their weather brief, understood the conditions. We're 45% probability of violation for liftoff. Moderate conditions along the ascent corridor. After the weather brief, they proceeded to get suited up. And then they jumped into their Teslas, drove out to the pad, ascended the launch tower.
SpaceX, we had a good side hatch leak check.
Climbed into their capsule, climbed into Dragon Freedom.
Copies. Good side hatch leak check.
Good news on that leak check.
And just shut the door.
That's right.
So another big milestone complete.
Things going really smoothly.
Up next at T-minus 1 hour and 54 minutes, just about 6 minutes from now, they'll reset the crew arm, GSE, for launch. GSE.
Ground support equipment. And so the crew access arm, you can see it on the left-hand side of the screen there, is kind of the breezeway going from the launch tower to the Dragon capsule, which is how the crew get inside. And before launch, of course, that crew access arm will need to be retracted so that the rocket can depart the ground.
And we'll get to see that first time that crew access arm will pull away from a Dragon with 2 astronauts on board at this launch complex. The first time ever.
First time launching humans from Complex 40. It's an exciting day.
It is indeed a historic day. We're coming up on 1 hour and 59 minutes and counting.
Definitely see some clouds rolling through on the left-hand side there, but it's definitely worth giving it a try, just in case we get that
Dragon
launch.
SpaceX for post-ingress briefing.
Good window of weather at launch time 0.
Freedom's with you.
Dragon, so good news is we've got a healthy pad, Dragon is healthy, and Falcon is looking good. The story remains weather, as previously briefed. We're watching radar data in real time. Currently, we'd be no-go to launch, but we think there's a real shot of getting a clearing in the weather around T-minus 0, and the ascent weather continues to look good, so we've got a chance of going to space today. We'll check in as we have more updates. How copy?
Freedom copies. Good pad, good vehicle. And you're saying there's a chance with the weather. Outstanding.
So they just got their crew brief from SpaceX, and mostly good, except for the weather. But as Nick Hague just pointed to the positive side of things.
So you're
sounds
saying
like
there's a chance.
That's right, exactly.
That's right.
Well, from that left-hand side, you can certainly see it. It's a small storm with rain on the left part of the screen and a little more of a clearing area on the right hand. That is exactly how it is on radar.
Yep, we've got some patchy weather rolling through, but it sounds like the vehicle itself is in great shape. That launch countdown going really smoothly. Hatch closure right on time with a good leak check. The suits are in a good configuration. Crew members are doing well. So we'll just keep hoping for a good weather window just under 2 hours from now. And of course, we'll have a big decision point before we start to put fuel on board the rocket, because that's something that's harder to back away from once we start that process. So we really want to commit thinking that there is a very good positive shot of launching today before we start fueling the rocket.
That's right, because when that fueling operation begins, it's all very tightly choreographed. It's autonomous. All of the procedures, the flowing of the propellants, they're automated. It all happens. So it kicks off at T-minus 35 minutes and rolls all the way to that T0, locking in that exact second for launch.
Absolutely. And for the crew, it's a little bit different for every rocket, but for Falcon, the way we would do that is we would actually take all of that fuel that we've loaded onto the vehicle and take it off of the vehicle before the crew themselves would get out of their Dragon capsule. But weather scrubs certainly happen. Of course, we don't want to launch if the weather doesn't say it's a good day to launch.
Throughout the broadcast, we've been engaging you, the viewer, handing off your questions to Zena Cardman, NASA astronaut, through the hashtag AskNASA on Facebook, X, YouTube, and Twitch. And so we've got another question now from Santosh. See, want to be accurate with the pronunciation. Santosh on X asks, do they, astronauts, eat something before liftoff to space?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a long journey. These astronauts will be on a roughly 28-hour ride from the ground here to the International Space Station. Of course, they can eat while they're on board the Dragon spacecraft, but today is a long day, so they do have some breakfast. But their bigger meal was dinner last night, and we have an amazing support staff in crew quarters where these crew have been quarantining for the last week. And you actually get to put in some requests for a special meal of your choosing for that. We call it the ultimate meal.
And the chefs here are amazing. I hear they can
Phenomenal.
make just about anything.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They are incredibly talented. And we have those people in place because the crew are in quarantine, and so we really want to keep them healthy and make sure that all of the food that they're eating is not going to be one barrier of many little puzzle pieces that all have to come together on this launch day.
Right. You wouldn't want any food poisoning happening, any kind of taking any kind of chance
no,
with the
indeed.
food.
No, indeed.
Not on this day.
Absolutely.
And probably good to get a really good meal as your last meal on Earth, because space food is different.
Yeah, it's different. It's actually, in my opinion, really quite good. I've had a chance to try a lot of it. Of course, everybody's different. Some people are more food motivated than others. And for crew members like Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams, they didn't necessarily have exactly the menu that they would have chosen for this longer than expected mission. And so we all have to learn to be flexible and share our food with each other. But the ability to have a hot meal that you can share with your friends and colleagues is still really, really amazing for morale when you're in space. For their free flight on the way to the space station, they will, of course, have food in their Dragon capsule, but they don't have a way to heat it up, and so they'll be eating room temperature food, which is better than nothing.
So if you're a severe foodie, space food will be an adjustment. I can imagine.
Yes.
That's something you can live with for 6 months.
Absolutely.
I certainly would.
Yes.
We've got another question now. K Aerospace asks on X, how does the astronaut underwater training significantly simulate in-space conditions and microgravity?
Yeah, so being weightless is actually pretty similar in some ways to floating underwater. And it's really difficult to find an environment here on Earth where you could be weightless, but floating in a pool is a great way to practice. One difference is that, unlike in space, underwater in a swimming pool, you experience water drag. And so that can be both a blessing and a curse. In the swimming pool, it is really difficult to get moving, but it's pretty easy to slow down. Whereas if you're doing a spacewalk on the International Space Station, it's pretty easy to get going, but it can be harder to stop. So you have to really think ahead and remember to decelerate yourself. The spacesuits that we use for doing spacewalks, unlike these launch and landing suits that you see Nick and Aleksandr wearing today, they weigh about 350 pounds. So, and of course that's on Earth. They're weightless in space, but they still have mass, and so they still have inertia. So it's really, really valuable to get to train for those spacewalks here on Earth. Getting to know all of the procedures, all of the equipment, and how to move in a spacesuit that doesn't necessarily move exactly like your body does.
And there's an extra spacesuit going up on board this Crew-9 Dragon today, and that is the SpaceX spacesuit for Butch Wilmore.
That's right. Yeah, there is one already on board that Suni has tried on, and we're sending up an additional one for Butch Wilmore, and that is so that when they come back home on this Crew-9 Dragon capsule, they will, just like Aleksandr and Nick, have a way to connect to the communications and the life support systems of the Dragon capsule.
All right, T-minus 1 hour and 50 minutes and counting. Let's take you inside Mission Control in Houston now, where flight controllers are constantly monitoring the International Space Station and the people living on board. We welcome in NASA's Nilofer Ramji, who is live there at Johnson Space Center. Nilofer, good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon, Daryl. Thanks so much. This is Mission Control Houston here in the International Space Station's Flight Control Room here at NASA's Johnson Space Center. The team continues to prepare for launch, and it's led by Flight Director Nicole McElroy. Assuming weather is acceptable for launch, we will be launching the 9th rotational crew mission to the International Space Station under the agency's Commercial Crew Program. So about 3 weeks ago, the port where Crew-9 will dock was vacated by Boeing Starliner as part of the agency's crew flight test. Teams safely returned the uncrewed Starliner to Earth following a landing on September 6th at the White Sands Space Harbor in New Mexico. The spacecraft concluded its 3-month flight test to the International Space Station. Now, with the arrival of Crew-9, Dragon Freedom will be Butch and Suni's ride home in February, as you said. Right now, the Crew-8 Dragon has been reconfigured so that Butch and Suni have 2 seats available for them in the event of an emergency aboard station. The arrival of NASA astronaut Don Pettit and Roscosmos cosmonauts Alexei Ovchinin and Ivan Wagner earlier this month, and the departure of the Soyuz MS-25 on Monday with NASA astronaut Tracy Dyson coming home marks the commencement of Expedition 72, led by the new commander, Suni Williams. So we currently have 9 people living and working aboard the space station, and that number will be bumped up to 11 for just about a week. During that time, Hague and Gorbunov will go over handover procedures with Crew-8, which includes a safety briefing and orientation. Then they're going to jump right in and help advance scientific knowledge and demonstrate new technologies supporting our efforts preparing for human missions to the moon. Following the week-long handover, the Crew-8 members, which include NASA astronauts Commander Matthew Dominic, pilot Michael Barrett, and mission specialists Jeanette Epps, alongside Roscosmos cosmonaut Aleksandr Gorbunov, will prepare for their undocking no earlier than October 7th. Direct hand counting. And now, with under 2 hours before launch, we're going to send it back to you, Daryl, at Kennedy.
Thank you very much, Nilofer. A great look inside Mission Control in Houston as they get ready for the arrival of Crew-9, Commander Nick Hague, and cosmonaut Aleksandr Gorbunov. We're launching today from Space Launch Complex 40, and it's a historic day should we be able to get a launch off through the weather. Slick 40 previously hosted NASA missions NG-20, CRS-30, and NG-21. Those are cargo resupply missions. SpaceX did work for almost about 2 years to get this pad upgraded for human spaceflight. It's a long process, one that NASA walked alongside of SpaceX through those years of building out the infrastructure and making the necessary upgrades, not the least of which was the crew access arm, what you see there on your screen. Made some upgrades to that crew access arm that has 3 hydraulic motors instead of a linkage. The arm is 7 feet longer than the one at pad 39A. It's got a larger white room. It's built different, stiffened plate construction instead of truss. And the arm, you can't really tell from this shot, but it is horizontal and perpendicular to Dragon versus coming in at an angle. And this pad is also just a little bit farther away from the water that you see there in the background, the Atlantic Ocean. And that calculation has to be taken into account for the if there were to be an emergency egress. That capsule would come right off the top of the rocket and go out over into the Atlantic and come down under parachutes. Well, that's a different trip from that location than it is from 39A even. So there was a lot that went into even some small things that you might not think of. Even the launch azimuth is slightly different from, and then, I mean, we're only, what, a mile away?
That's exactly right. Little details like that matter when you're trying to get from the ground all the way to
Dragon
the International
SpaceX,
Space Center.
the closeout team has departed the crew arm and is on their way back.
Freedom copies, and if they're listening, thank you guys.
Some kind words there.
We'll relay to them.
Nick Hague to the closeout crew who have strapped them in to their Dragon Freedom, closed the side hatch, and now leaving these two as the only one who will be on the pad for launch.
It's a lonely place, but you do have your crewmate there.
Absolutely. Yeah, it might seem, but you know how many people have been rooting for you the whole way, prepared you for this day, and are there supporting you for liftoff. So we have an enormous team of people here at Kennedy Space Center, in Mission Control Hawthorne, in California, and in Mission Control Houston in Texas.
Let's talk a little bit about the patch. We mentioned that at the top of the broadcast. It's a very special patch. One of the first tasks Crew-9 did was design this patch. This is their mission patch. It has since been modified, though, due to changes in this mission. And as you're looking at it here, you can see that it shows the trail of a rocket launching to the International Space Station with the constellation Draco, honoring the Dragon spacecraft that will take the crew there. Below everything are what you mentioned earlier, coastal waves representing our blue planet, the global ocean linking all continents. You also see a falcon with a number 9 on its beak and a crescent moon as its eye, a nod to the Falcon 9 rocket. And the Delta symbol at the bottom there, used since 1961, signifies historic connections to the earliest days of space ventures. And you had a hand, you and your team, when you were part of this crew of designing it.
Absolutely. One of the traditions I love in human spaceflight are these patches that represent the crew and the teams who prepare us for the mission, prepare us for flight. And so our entire crew is able to contribute to the design of this patch, able to include meaningful symbols, even some of the colors that we used for the patch. The gold and the red, the black and the white are a nod to the maritime signaling flag for the number 9, another little piece of trivia. So there's so much symbolism that goes into a patch like this, and a patch that I've been really proud to wear on my shoulder for the last year and a half. It's a little bit modified today, as you mentioned, Daryl. It's been modified to have no names on the patch. Previously, we had the names of the 4 launching crew members across the top there. But as we have modified this mission to save 2 seats for Butch, Wilmore, and Suni Williams on the downhill, we removed the names from the patch, and this was a gesture to, it's not just the people on the rocket who are a part of this mission. It takes an entire team to include my crewmate Stephanie Wilson, myself, and all of the people who have gotten Nick and Aleksandr ready for this launch today. So I'm really, really honored to see that patch that they've represented. We've seen it several times here on launch day in the operations and checkout building as they were walking out to the Teslas, and we've seen it many times throughout this launch day. And great seeing Nick and Alex ready there. We are doing well on the timeline. The Dragon capsule is in great shape. The hatch is closed with a good leak check. Their suits are closed with a good leak check. Everything's in a good configuration. We are just standing by for monitoring the weather as we continue to progress towards T0 in an hour and 40 minutes from now. Things will get a little more dynamic in just over half an hour from now as we get ready to do final checks before we put any fuel on board the Falcon 9 rocket. But for now, because we have some extra buffer built into the timeline for things like the side hatch leak check, we're in great shape. And the number one job of the crew right now is to just be mellow and be ready. You might see them wiggling their toes a little bit in their boots, keeping their legs from falling asleep as they're in this position. It's a long time to be lying on your back. You can see Nick Hague on the right there. He's reaching up, interacting with his displays a little bit. It's a great time to read through some of the procedures and cue cards that we have. These are all procedures that the crew have rehearsed many, many times before. But since they've got some extra bandwidth in the timeline right now, it's a great time to review all that material, so that when things get a little busier, they are fully ready to go.
We've seen in the past some astronauts so relaxed in this moment that get a little shut-eye.
This is true, yeah. We have certainly seen more than one crew member take a little bit of a snooze on the launch pad.
But you know you're comfortable and confident if you can do that.
Absolutely, yeah. It's easy to laugh at, but I think it's also a great indication of how calm and confident the crew are in the team and in the vehicle. They will definitely wake up when it's time to go. But doesn't look like any shut-eye for Nick or Alex today.
No. Yeah, nothing like a launch to get the blood flowing.
Absolutely, yep.
Well, this crew, they both got to bring on some special items from Earth to space. A few personal items for their roughly 5-month stay. And for this particular crew, here's a few of the items that they're taking up in space with them. Nick Hague, on the right, is taking a Space Force flag with him. It's, of course, something different than what he took the last time because Space Force, well, didn't even exist last time he flew. Nick said it's a privilege, though, to support all Guardians, the Space Force Guardians, who support human spaceflight and keep the crew safe by watching the skies and the cosmos every day.
Absolutely, and it's really exciting as well because Nick and Alex, as Crew-9, will be taking off from Pad 40, which is actually on the Space Force base.
Great note there. Great tie-in. For Aleksandr, he has pictures of his family and friends and other personal items excuse me, that represent different milestones of his life. They include the patch of his 2018 class and the flag of the higher education institution where he graduated from back in 2014. And during interviews on board the ISS that we see from time to time, you will see some of the astronauts bearing the collegiate paraphernalia, maybe a sweater or a flag or something.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's a common theme. Of course, everyone feels an allegiance to their alma mater or to their hometown. It's part of what makes us who we are, which is really a huge, important part of the reason why we make it to the International Space Station. We're bringing with us not only our professional backgrounds, but this incredible personal history.
T-minus 1 hour and 34 minutes and counting. We are just 4 minutes away from doing a health check on the launch escape system at T-minus 1 hour and 30 minutes. We'll hear that called out and communicated with the crew inside. As Crew-9 launches today, we get a launch. That only means that Crew-8, it will be their turn to come home.
That's exactly right. I know there's a picture of Crew-8.
Yeah, this is them as they walked out.
NASA, many months ago.
Yeah. Matt Dominic, Michael Barrett, Jeanette Epps, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Aleksandr Gorbunov. There you see them launching from the Space Center, and then, of course, they've been living and working on the space station now for 6 months. Once Crew-9 arrives, there will be what's called a handover for about 5 to 7 days, and then Crew-8 will undock.
Yeah, absolutely. That handover period is really, really useful. I mean, you can train for months and in most cases years to live and work on the International Space Station, but it's really hard to know exactly what it's like until you get there. So for rookie flyers, first-time flyers, that handover period is a great time to get a lot of advice from the people who are the experts who have been there most recently. And even for a veteran flyer, someone like Nick Hague, this is not his first trip to the International Space Station, so in many ways he's an absolute expert. But the International Space Station is changing and evolving constantly. So it's a great time to get to know what is new on the space station, what little quirks have changed, stowage locations, how things are working now, and a great chance to get that institutional knowledge from the people who have spent the last many months there. So I know Crew-8 is anxious for Crew-9's arrival because that means that Crew-8 can get home to see their families after a long and successful mission that's actually a little bit longer than even they anticipated.
Indeed, and a little longer of, a transition period. One of the first things we're going to do is get the Dragons deconfigured from what they were, where Crew-8 was configured in order to bring Butch and Suni home in the case of an emergency.
That's right, yeah.
Deconfigure that, right, and then get Crew-9 configured?
Absolutely, yeah. So that is one of the most important things that we do during handover is configure the Dragon capsule to be a lifeboat in case you needed to leave the space station quickly. And so that's something we do for every mission. It's one of the most important pieces of handover that we do. So Nick is going to get that handover from Matt Dominic, who was the previous Dragons commander. But in this case, it's a little bit extra special because they've been configured to bring Butch and Suni home for the last couple weeks. And so that would have meant 6 people coming home in a Dragon, but there are not, as you will notice, 6 seats. And so this required a lot of extra special engineering that a great team in Hawthorne especially led with the help of a lot of NASA personnel, NASA flight surgeons, and engineers, making sure that that would be a safe enough option, But the better option would be bringing Butch and Suni home in suits that interface with seats so that they have all of the life support systems and communications that you normally would in a spacecraft.
As we've been counting down, we've been paying close attention to the weather. Got another update here. Now you can see, well, there's quite a few storms in the area. We're right there at the Cape in the middle, dead middle of the screen. You see the outline of the state of Florida. We've got moisture that has been flowing over the state of Florida throughout the countdown today, and it's bringing with it some storm clouds. Our current probability of violation is at 45%, according to the launch weather officer, and that's a reason why. All of this is a remnant from Hurricane Helene's passage through and over the Gulf, which our thoughts and prayers are very much with the people who have been severely impacted by that storm, not only the Gulf of Florida, but also Georgia, North Carolina, and up into Kentucky, with some of the flooding that they've been dealing with, and some of the tragic loss of life as well. The conditions aren't they were not as nearly bad here. Had some winds in the area, but we're still seeing the effects of that storm having passed through from a meteorological standpoint, and this has left us with a band stalled out with moisture over the state that's firing up some storms. But all we need is just a little gap. So we know that it's not going to be a complete rainout today. We are having off and on storms. I just briefly stepped outside, looked out, and it was dry all around. But as I looked off into the distance, about a mile away, got a little rain coming down. So it's very spotty, and we'll see how it all plays out here. Everything else is good. We got an update from the core that said the spacecraft is healthy, the booster is healthy, the pad's good to go. So we're in a good position to take advantage of a little break in the weather, which is what we have for our forecast today.
Yes, indeed. With all of those other components all coming together, the vehicle is good, the crew are in good shape, downrange weather is looking good. So we'll just hope for a window in the weather right here at Pad 40.
You're looking inside the Dragon Freedom. This is the spacecraft that will take Crew-9 up into space, and there's a look at it from the outside. It is the capsule's fourth space flight. Freedom's first flight was Crew-4 and also supported private missions Axiom 2 and 3. Freedom was given its name by that man right there, Commander Kjell Lindgren, who said the name celebrates a fundamental human right and the industry and innovation that arises from the unencumbered human spirit. So far, Freedom has totaled 201 days in space. It will, of course, add to that number once it launches with Crew-9 on board and docks to the International Space Station.
One of my favorite things about a reusable capsule and reusable rockets like this is that you get to enjoy some of the history of that vehicle. A lot of the spaceships that we fly now are named after previous spaceships, which were named after research vessels. But this one is new and unique. What an amazing vehicle to get to fly in. This is actually the only Dragon that I have ever been in, but I've been in it twice. Once for Crew-4 launch and once at CEIT, which is kind of a test drive where we get inside the flight vehicle for Crew-9.
And do they have some of their stickers up from previous flights?
They do. You may notice that behind Aleksandr Gorbunov's head, just off to the left of the screen there.
I see it.
Not necessarily something we are supposed to do.
Oh. Xena has called you out, Crew-4.
I can also say, if I were in that spacecraft, I would be adding a Crew-9 sticker
Oh,
right there.
there you go. There you go. I mean, yeah, puts a little, mark there on the capsule, and I mean, you spend so much time in it, the training, the flight. It's with you there on orbit.
Yeah, I mean, this place starts to feel like home. Absolutely. We're still about 40 minutes away from the go-no-go for propellant loading on the vehicle, which will be a big decision point for us today as we continue to watch this weather window here at the pad.
Yeah, that's the big one. The storm, if you look on the screen to the left, is now out at sea. It had dumped a little rain here at the space complex, but it is now almost completely offshore. There's more behind it, but we've got a nice little gap between the storms that just passed and the ones that are coming along the way. We can see them coming. They're about halfway past the state. Halfway, I guess, passing over the state.
Yes, indeed. It's actually really amazing to see the sun is starting to come out. You can see that on the left screen there, but you can actually also see it hitting Aleksandr Gorbunov's right knee as it's coming through the Dragoncraft window. Great reminder that they are, for now, still on Earth. This is certainly not the first time it's been down to the wire for weather on a launch. I remember being here for Demo 2, the first Crew Dragon launch.
Oh, yeah.
We got so close.
There was a weather scrub.
That's right.
And then I believe on the second attempt even, there was also a storm cloud that was in the area, came into the...
Absolutely,
the zone of...
That first attempt, I thought we were going to go, and we didn't. That second attempt, I thought we wouldn't go, and we did.
That's exactly right. That's exactly how it played out.
So it goes.
Thought the same thing.
Yep.
Well, we just got a few minutes before we welcome in our broadcast teams from SpaceX in California and Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. And before that happens, though, how about we take another social question? If you want to submit your question, you can do so on the platforms Facebook, YouTube, X, and Twitch. Just use the hashtag AskNASA, and we will be able to see it. Like this question that we got from Future on X, who asked, my son Ryan, who is 8 years old, asks, can NASA take this rocket to the moon next?
Oh, that's a great question. We will be taking a different rocket than this one for our return to the moon with the Artemis missions. You'll notice rockets that took the Apollo astronauts to the moon were a little bit larger than this one. A 3-stage rocket, the Saturn V rocket, with quite a bit more delta V, or ability to move mass from the surface of the Earth to somewhere really, really far away, like the moon. Actually requires a lot more propellant, a lot more power. So we won't be taking the Falcon 9, but SpaceX is certainly involved in developing their own heavy lift rocket, the Starship, which will be part of the infrastructure of the Artemis missions. So the current ConOps, or the current way we're going to do this, is that crew, the astronauts, are going to take off from Earth on a NASA rocket in an Orion capsule, and then a different rocket, the Starship, will rendezvous with those NASA crew members and then take them to the lunar surface.
Part of the human landing system that we've contracted with SpaceX to provide that descent down to the lunar surface. And the rocket you mentioned, Space Launch System. We currently have the segments for that rocket here at the Kennedy Space Center in our complex around the VAB, or Vehicle Assembly Building. It's all part of the Artemis program, NASA's program to return to the moon, put the first woman and person of color on the surface of the moon. So we have time to slip in another comment from Zena, I was going to say. About just the history of the flight today. This is a crew of 2 versus a crew of 4, and that was changed in order to provide seats, which you can see there on the left and the right. They're empty. Those seats will be filled by Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams when they return about 5 months from now.
That's right. This is a crew of 2, although we spent the last 18 months or so training as a crew of 4. My crewmate Stephanie Wilson and I are very much alongside Nick Hague and Aleksandr Gorbunov as they prepare for liftoff today. It takes a whole team, and so even though we will not be leaving Earth today, I am really proud to have been part of this team getting them ready. It's a huge collaborative effort, and it's something that I feel really humbled and honored to be part of.
Just a few seconds away now from our joint coverage with SpaceX.
Very exciting. Means we're getting closer.
That's right. Liftoff currently at 1:17 and 21 seconds p.m. Eastern Time. Good afternoon. I'm NASA's Daryl Nail, and I'm joining you here from the Kennedy Space Center, and this is NASA astronaut Zena Cardman, who has been gracious to spend the last 3 hours with us as we count down to the launch of Dragon spacecraft Freedom, sitting on top of a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket. Liftoff time is still holding for 1:17 p.m. Eastern Time. You're watching live launch coverage of NASA and SpaceX's 9th rotational flight to the International Space Station. NASA astronaut Nick Hague and cosmonaut Aleksandr Gorbunov will be launching from Space Launch Complex 40 at the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station right here in Florida in a little over an hour. Once both of them get to station, they will join flight engineers Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams as part of Expedition 72 and other crew members already on station. Butch and Suni arrived to the International Space Station on a Starliner test flight back in June. But after experiencing some technical issues with Starliner, NASA extended Butch and Suni's stay to about 8 months after prioritizing safety by including them in Crew-9 and bringing them back on a Dragon capsule. As you can imagine, they are awaiting both Nick and Aleksandr to join them on station. You trained with this crew. You were at one time the commander of this crew, but it had to change due to the decision made to prioritize the safety of Butch and Suni. What are your thoughts about just that change? What was your reaction when you heard about it, and How have you been carrying yourself forward in that moment?
Yeah, Daryl, it's complex, but so is spaceflight. Butch and Suni are both test pilots, and they were on a test mission for that Starliner spacecraft. And so I think it's actually really valuable experience that we've gotten and a lot of great data, but we always prioritize the safety of the crew. And so even though we were all grateful to see that spacecraft land safely without crew on board, I personally think it's a good decision to always prioritize safety of the crew members. And Butch and Suni are professionals who are well prepared. They are previous space flyers who have spent time on the space station before. So they're doing great work on board the space station now.
And you're quite the professional as well, Zena, caring not only about your team and supporting them as they've continued to make these changes, but also being here with us to walk us through the milestones as we get ready for launch.
Yeah,
Let's
it's
take
my
you.
pleasure.
Yes, absolutely. Let's take you through Crew-9's launch day preparations so far this morning. After waking up and having a bite to eat, SpaceX helped Nick and Aleksandr into their suits inside historic crew quarters suit-up room. They also played a card game, a tradition, to beat the commander, to use up all his bad luck before the flight. Then the crew followed in the same footsteps as every NASA astronaut since Apollo 7 in 1968, walking out to greet a crowd of family and friends.
Freedom's with you.
Dragon, just wanted to check in. Falcon and Dragon are still looking healthy for a launch attempt today. We're still watching the real-time weather for conditions at the T0. Ascent corridor does still remain go based on the latest forecasts. At this time, we are trending to continue, and we expect to have the next update around the T-minus 1 hour mark. How copy?
And Freedom copies. Ascent corridor is good, and we're just looking at local weather. We'll get an update at the T-minus 1 hour, and crew's doing good.
Great to hear.
Well, there you got the update. We got to listen in as SpaceX updated the crew right there, Crew-9 inside their capsule. And just to complete the thought, you see them now. The crew drove out to the pad. They ingressed the capsule, and they got buckled in, had their suits pressure checked, and are in good shape for launch at this moment. So at this time, we are expanding our coverage and would like to welcome SpaceX and NASA commentators joining us live from Hawthorne, California. Welcome to Leah and Atticus.
Thanks, Daryl, and hello to those of you joining us today. I'm Leah Cheshire with NASA Communications.
And I'm Atticus Federa, a propulsion engineer here at SpaceX. We are excited to be joining you from Mission Control here in Hawthorne as we count down to liftoff of Crew-9 just over an hour from now. So far this year, we've launched 5 missions to the space station, which includes 3 resupply missions, and those are CRS-30, Northrop Grumman 20 and 21, as well as 2 human spaceflight missions, Crew-8 and Axiom-3. Overall, this will be Dragon's 44th visit to the space station and its 13th human spaceflight mission to the orbiting lab.
As Daryl mentioned, today's crew will fly aboard the Dragon spacecraft named Freedom, which previously flew the NASA Crew-4 mission, in addition to Axiom missions 2 and 3. Over the last 3+ hours, Crew-9 has been going through the detailed process of getting ready for their mission to the International Space Station. So let's introduce you to the crew. In the commander's seat, NASA astronaut and U.S. Space Force Colonel Nick Hague. He is making his second trip to low Earth orbit. This Kansas native and test pilot was selected by NASA as an astronaut in 2013 and has spent a total of 203 days in space conducting 3 spacewalks. Next to him is mission specialist Aleksandr Gorbunov, who was selected to be a cosmonaut in 2018. He studied engineering with qualifications in spacecraft and upper stages from the Moscow Aviation Institute, and he is a first-time flyer.
We are so excited to have Nick and Aleksandr on board today. To date, SpaceX has flown 54 passengers to space since the Demo 2 mission in May of 2020. And coming up here at about T-minus 45 minutes, we'll be listening to the team to report their readiness for the propellant load with a final go-no-go pull. So far, it continues to be a smooth countdown, and we're looking good for an on-time liftoff at 1:17 p.m. Eastern Time from Slick 40 in Florida. Today's launch is a big day for spaceflight. It will be the first time in history astronauts will launch from Space Launch Complex 40. So while we wait for that go poll, let's learn just a bit more about how Slick 40 was prepared for today's flight. SpaceX acquired the lease for Slick 40 back in 2007, and 3 years later, Falcon 9 made its inaugural flight from the pad. Since then, Slick 40 has launched dozens of notable missions for SpaceX, including our first demonstration missions as part of NASA's Commercial Orbital Transportation Services program, as well as the very first Dragon commercial resupply services missions. As of today, Pad 40 has hosted over 200 Falcon 9 launches. In 2023, in order to accommodate for the growing Dragon manifest, we added a tower and access arm to support human spaceflight missions. So we now have the flexibility to launch Dragon missions at either Launch Complex 39A or at Slick 40. And in March of this year, the CRS-30 mission to the space station was the very first to use this access arm for the late loading of time-sensitive cargo. And today, for the very first time, a crew boarded Dragon using this new access arm to fly to space. To help prepare Slick 40, the team also added emergency egress chutes that provide a new way to rapidly evacuate anyone off the tower to maximize human safety across a variety of scenarios. This is a bit different from the slide basket system that is used at Launch Complex 39A, where baskets are suspended from slide wires that extend from the launch tower to a landing zone.
This is something that, we hope we never have to use, obviously, but it is really amazing how quickly it unfolds and how quickly it allows someone to get off of the pad or out of the kind of danger area, get into that car and move away.
Yeah, certainly.
So sorry about that.
No worries. As a reminder, 2 of the seats will be empty for today's flight, and they will be filled during our return next February by NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams, who are currently living and working aboard the space station.
Butch and Suni launched on June 5th as part of NASA's Boeing crew flight test on the Starliner spacecraft. As Starliner approached the space station for docking, NASA and Boeing identified helium leaks and experienced issues with the spacecraft's reaction control thrusters. Following weeks of in-space and ground testing, technical interchange meetings, and agency reviews, NASA made the decision to prioritize safety and return Starliner without its crew. Starliner did safely land uncrewed on Saturday, September 7th.
To prepare for those manifest changes on today's flight, Nick Hague and Aleksandr Gorbunov ran through a number of training exercises to allow Aleksandr to build his expertise on Dragon operations. They also performed emergency scenarios with stand-ins for Butch and Suni to simulate the conditions they could face during the downhill or return portion of flight, and that is targeted for February of 2025.
For each crew, SpaceX suits are custom tailored to fit each astronaut and provide oxygen, cooling, communications, and protection during the dynamic phases of flight. For Crew-9's return, there was already a reserve spacesuit on the space station that NASA astronaut Suni Williams will wear for the journey home. In fact, Suni helped SpaceX fit test their spacesuits a few years ago as part of the preparations for crew missions. SpaceX built a prototype of the IVA, or intravehicular activity, flight suit design for the original CCP cadre, which included Suni, as part of the overall commercial crew development process. Butch Wilmore's suit was created using measurements provided by NASA based on his sizing for an extravehicular mobility unit, or EMU, which are the suits astronauts wear on spacewalks outside the space station, and that's being delivered on today's launch.
So everything is set for Butch and Suni to return with Nick and Aleksandr when Crew-9 comes home next year. Now we're just at about T-minus 1 hour and 7 minutes, counting down to today's launch. While we wait, let's check in with Nilofer at the Johnson Space Center to see how things are shaping up at Mission Control in Houston.
Yes, and thank you so much, Atticus. Welcome back to Mission Control here at Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. We are here in the hub of human spaceflight at NASA. The team has pulled go for launch. The International Space Station is ready for the crew to lift off as they begin their journey to the orbiting laboratory. In the home of Rendezvous Tomorrow, NASA and SpaceX flight controllers will enter into integrated operations. This means that both flight control teams will conduct a series of go and no-go polls for Dragon Freedom's docking to the space station. Rotation missions like Crew-9 help NASA to continue to maximize the important research and technology demonstrations made possible only in the International Space Station's unique microgravity environment. The space station is critical for NASA to prepare for future commercial low Earth orbit destinations and to understand and overcome the challenges of long-duration spaceflight necessary for a long-term presence on the Moon and crewed missions deeper into our solar system, including Mars. So now let's take a closer look at the mission and what Crew-9 will have to look forward to during their 5-month stay aboard the International Space Station.
Dragon, heads up that we are going to be cycling
The mission hasn't changed in 25 years. It's to get to the space station, conduct research, and come home. How we're going to do that is going to look a little bit different. Alex and myself are going to launch with 2 empty seats, so we've got room for Butch and Suni to join us once we get there. They've been on orbit months already, and one of the biggest challenges ahead for Alex and I, one of the most exciting aspects, is how are we going to integrate into their crew and get to work on the space station, doing the research and performing the spacewalks and the station upgrades and helping us continue that mission of discovery. The International Space Station is this unique place that we have built over the course of a decade with 100 launches and 100 spacewalks to assemble it on orbit. It lets us remove gravity from all of our science experiments. You've all seen video of balls of water floating around and morphing it, and we can do that with other materials and see what properties we aren't able to see when gravity just squashes everything flat. That knowledge helps us make life better on the ground. I've had the privilege of spending more than 200 days on the International Space Station, and what is crystal clear to me is how important the international is in the International Space Station. Together we accomplish more than we could by ourselves. Together we tackle all the problems that dynamic nature of space throws at us. The more we explore, the more we try to overcome all those challenges of living in weightlessness, in a high radiation environment, and how to counteract those things, the more we learn about how the human body works. But a long-duration mission is something really to cherish because it's a unique opportunity to let your body fully adapt, and then at some point you reach this kind of steady state where you are working and living in space, and that's your normal. Spaceflight is hard. It's dynamic, it's unpredictable, but that's no different than the way it's always been. And just being able to watch the agency navigate those decisions over the last several months and balance the risk and the safety of the crew has been phenomenal. And what is crystal clear in that entire process is the commitment to making sure that when we launch crews, we're going to bring them home safe. I'm excited to get back to the space station. I'm excited to be part of Expedition 72 so we can get to work, because that's what this is all about. It's about exploration, exploring the human body, exploring Earth, exploring the universe. It's about discovery. It's about learning. It's about how do we imagine the impossible and make it possible.
And welcome back here to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Just a quick programming note. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you refresh your browser, because that will allow you to chat with us, not us specifically, but with our producers and our support folks who will answer your questions. But then also, if you use the hashtag AskNASA, we'll get the questions to our astronaut, Zena Cardman, so she can answer them. And she's been doing a great job of answering all the questions leading up until this point.
Thanks, Daryl. It's been a blast to be with you. It's been a several hours long process, actually, just part of an even longer process to get astronauts to the International Space Station.
And we're just a little more than an hour away from liftoff now, as we look forward to a launch from Space Launch Complex 40 here at the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. We have been monitoring the weather. One of the factors in today's launch, we have a good spacecraft, we have a good rocket,
Dragon,
and we have a good
you
pad.
Are go for section 5 of 4.100. Please report when you are go for launch.
And Freedom copies. We're go for section 5 and 4.100.
And there you heard communication between Commander Nick Hague and SpaceX Core, the Crew Operations and Resource Engineer. This is communication we're going to be hearing throughout this point leading up to liftoff.
That's right. Core, that voice from Mission Control in Hawthorne, is the one voice who is communicating directly with the crew today. You'll hear a few voices, but for the most part, we really like to keep those communications to a minimum. But our core, whose name is Shiva, just told the crew that we are continuing to progress towards launch. The next big milestone coming up will be the go, no-go decision to start loading propellant onto the Falcon 9 rocket.
And that's a big decision, Zena, because as you know, that is going to take the weather into account. And
SpaceX Freedom, Section 5, 5.4, we're go for launch.
SpaceX copies. Crew are ready for launch.
Some very exciting words to hear from Commander Nick Hague.
They are ready to go. Is the weather ready to go? We'll find that out in just a bit. They're going to make that decision, as you mentioned, about the weather before they start fueling the rocket, because once they do that, that locks it in at T-minus 35 minutes, and we're tanking the rocket at that point, and it's a pretty strong commitment at that point. As you can see on your screen, the radar is showing a storm that just moved offshore. That dumped some rain around the area, certainly on the launch pad. It didn't cause any harm. There were no problems with that. We can handle some rain on the rocket and on the launch pad. But what is more concerning is the stuff behind it. And from the satellite view, you can see that there is a plume of moisture that's developing in the southeastern part of the state of Florida and is moving its way upwards towards the northeast, directing over top of us. The idea, though, is, and what launch managers are hoping for, and certainly what the crew is hoping for, is that in between the rain, the lightning, and those storm cells are some clear patches of sky. All they need is a 10 nautical mile stretch around the launch pad, and they can launch into space. That's what we're hoping for. We got our fingers crossed.
Yes, we sure do. But weather or not, the crew themselves are ready. You see what I did there?
I did. Yes, and so you can see there that is the condensing of the warm Florida air from the ground side of the liquid oxygen. We haven't started loaded yet, but certainly getting the tanks ready to start loading that up. In the meantime, let's head back out to California and join SpaceX.
Thank you so much, Daryl. All types of human spaceflight missions are taking flight this year, including our recent Polaris Dawn mission. Polaris Dawn was the first of up to 3 missions in the Polaris program, which will demonstrate new technologies, conduct extensive research, and culminate in a flight of SpaceX's Starship with humans on board. After nearly 5 days in orbit, Dragon and the 4-person Polaris Dawn crew safely splashed down on September 15th off the coast of Dry Tortugas, Florida, completing the first spaceflight mission of the Polaris Dawn program. The Polaris Dawn crew, that you can see there on your screen, performed some firsts during their mission. Dragon and the crew reached over 1,400 kilometers altitude, the highest Earth orbit flown since the Apollo program, making Anna Menon and Sarah Gillis the current record holders for traveling farther from Earth than any other woman to date. The crew also participated in the first ever commercial EVA, or extravehicular activity, wearing SpaceX's newly developed EVA suits. They also conducted about 36 research studies and experiments from 31 partner institutions, including NASA. And in addition to all of that, they also tested Starlink laser-based communications in space.
That's right. As Atticus mentioned, NASA's Human Research Program flew 3 investigations on Polaris Dawn. The first study tested a compact, commercially available device that can collect astronauts' blood pressure, body temperature, ultrasounds, and other health information to see how easily it can gather data in space. The investigation will also assess whether the technology can help provide robust telemedicine in space. Another investigation sought to better understand the space-related motion sickness that's experienced by many astronauts through surveys and other health data. And the third study evaluated whether crews experience any injuries or discomfort from re-entry back to Earth, helping us at NASA design re-entry protocols that best protect crews. Additional human research was conducted on the Polaris Dawn crew members through the NASA-funded Translational Research Institute for Space Health, a cooperative agreement with multiple universities assessing sleep, eye health, immune systems, and more to help NASA build and maintain a robust archive of human health on everyone who flies in space.
Missions like Crew-9 and Polaris Dawn are important steps in building our future in space. Each mission delivers critical lessons and science that can inform long-duration spaceflight missions and help us continue on our journey to making life multi-planetary. Lessons learned also help guide development of SpaceX's Starship vehicle, which will be a key element in putting humans back on the moon and eventually on Mars. Before we head into our next interview, let's learn a bit more about what's happening with Starship down at SpaceX headquarters in Starbase, Texas. The first flight of Starship was in April of 2023, and the vehicle for the fifth flight is currently stacked and ready to fly. We made major strides with Flight 4 earlier this summer with a successful landing burn and a soft splashdown of our super heavy booster. We also saw a Starship survive re-entry for the first time with views live streamed from the vehicle via Starlink from space all the way through splashdown. We've got more flights planned that will start demonstrating some of the key technologies that will help make Starship fully and rapidly reusable. Now, the one I'm super excited about is catching that super heavy booster, which we'll be attempting on our next flight. If you've seen Starbase recently, you probably noticed that our teams have completed stacking the second launch tower at Starbase, which will be coming online early next year. Having two operational launch towers paired with ships and boosters rolling off the line in our new Star Factory will allow us to increase our flight cadence and test more rapidly. Our teams at Starbase have been hard at work on the continued Star Factory expansion. This 1 million square foot facility brings Starship and Super Heavy manufacturing closer together for more optimized production. And that will set the stage for us to rapidly produce hundreds of ships each year. And that's what it's going to take to build a self-sustaining city on Mars. Production lines are spinning up in Star Factory with multiple next-generation Starships currently in build as we get ready to ramp up our launch rate. We did recently static fire the Starship for Flight 6, producing some incredible video of its 6 Raptor engines in action. And we do have boosters already built for the next several flights.
And I'm really looking forward to seeing us catch the booster on the tower. That'll be a huge milestone. So I think we're all looking forward to that. Now, because Starship will serve as the lunar lander on Artemis 3, which is currently scheduled for the second half of 2026, it'll be the first to send humans to the lunar surface since Apollo. So we can expect to see SpaceX ramping up testing this year and next. The NASA and SpaceX teams have been working through a ton of additional hardware milestones outside of the flight tests, including the recent testing conducted with Starship's airlock and the Axiom spacesuits NASA astronauts will be wearing on future moonwalks.
One of the next major milestones in testing will be the first ever ship-to-ship propellant transfer, where two Starships will rendezvous in space and transfer propellant from one to the other. Putting humans back on the moon is a major milestone. Our mission at SpaceX is to enable this type of exploration, and we can't wait to see this feature unfold. For more on what else is happening in the world of exploration, we'll hand it back over to Daryl and the crew in Florida.
Thank you very much, Atticus. T-minus 52 minutes and counting until liftoff. T-minus 52 minutes and counting until liftoff. As we've mentioned, today will be the first time we launch astronauts from Pad 40. For more on what was done to make that happen, we now have NASA's Megan Cruz live from a nearby launch viewing location here at Kennedy.
Hey, thanks, Daryl. And I'd also like to introduce Alec Jacobs. You see him right there next to me on the screen. He's the launch site integration lead with the Commercial Crew program. And we wanted Alec on today because, Alec, you were part of certifying Slick 40 for this inaugural crewed launch. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I've had the pleasure of being on the team that's been working on Slick 40 for the past 2 years to get it ready to launch Crew. 2 years ago is when NASA and SpaceX made the decision that we wanted to be able to have Slick 40 as a backup launch pad for crewed missions. So since then, the teams have been hard at work implementing all the crew systems. We've implemented the crew tower, crew access arm, the emergency egress systems, and all the Dragon systems needed to fuel and get ready the Dragon spacecraft for launching crewed from this pad. So it's been a great work over the last 2 years, and things have really come together in the last 6 weeks as we've focused our effort on Slick 40.
Yeah, and you guys had to pivot to Slick 40, right? Because Crew-9 was supposed to launch on 39A, but as we know, it's really busy here on the Space Coast.
Yes, it is really busy on the Space Coast, like you said. So a lot of launches going on from both 39A and 40 across the Space Coast. One of the ones we were looking at closely was NASA's Europa Clipper, which is actually planned to go off of 39A in October timeframe. So because of that and because of the move to the Crew-9 launch date, we were able to move to Slick 40 because of the crew capability we've been working on for the last 2 years. So really glad we put all that effort into that backup capability at Slick 40, and now it's all coming together today as we hope to launch here in just a little bit.
Yeah, so it sounds like agility, flexibility, that was really key to getting us to launch day today. Can you walk us through some of the other changes that maybe the program had to navigate? I mean, including obviously, launching 2 members instead of 4.
Yeah, so a lot's happened in the last 6 weeks, and like you said, Megan, launching 2 crew members versus 4. Our teams have had to adjust to that, make sure we have the right training protocols and plans in place for the 2 versus 4 contingent. We're also able to let our first stage booster fly on its first mission out of Slick 40, get a flight on that booster, and now we're using it for the second time. And like you said, we're moving from 39A to Slick 40 for this launch, so a lot of flexibility among our teams and a lot of capability within our program and within NASA for our crew launch capability. So it's really great to see that we're able to accommodate all of these changes kind of at the last minute and still be able to get to launch today.
Yeah, really talented people that we work with here. So thank you so much, Alec. We're now just minutes away from polling the launch team to see if we're going to load propellant into the Falcon 9. So let's introduce you now to Ronnie Foreman, live at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California.
Thanks, Megan. I'm Ronnie Foreman, a senior commercial sales manager here at SpaceX, and I'm excited to be joining you all. We are coming up on just under 50 minutes to launch.
Dragon SpaceX for a weather update.
Call out there from our core about a weather update.
Freedom's with you.
Dragon, have good news that the most of the concerning weather that we saw from earlier has either cleared the pad or is trending to clear. We are still watching some precipitation, and we are expecting our next cross-check at around the T-minus 45-minute mark. We'll let you know, along with the go-no-go for a prop load, what that weather looks like. How copy?
Freedom copies. Outstanding news. Thank you.
Good news from our core there from Mission Control. We are coming up on just about 49 minutes to launch, and obviously our teams are carefully moving through the pre-flight process. A lot of preparations have brought us to this point, including a dry dress rehearsal and static fire on Tuesday. A dry dress rehearsal is a practice run before launch, where all of the steps are conducted except for the loading of propellants, which is why we call it dry. The integrated spacecraft and rocket are rolled out to the pad and raised vertically, and the crew and all of the support teams go through their steps exactly as they would on launch day to make sure that they're ready when we do go for launch. However, during a static fire test, which we also did earlier this week, the crew is not present. Propellants are loaded and the engines on the booster are fired for just a few seconds while the rocket is held down to the launch mount. The data from the static fire test is then reviewed and incorporated into NASA and SpaceX's decision to proceed with launch. All of that hard work brings us to today, and next up in our countdown, our launch director will check in with the team for readiness, both for prop load, as you heard earlier, and for launch. The Dragon team, as well as key NASA launch members, are currently at the Launch and Landing Control Center at SpaceX's Hangar X in Florida. The launch director will also check in with the Dragon mission director, or MD for short, and NASA launch manager to make sure they're ready to move forward. Right now, of course, our 2-person crew is on board Dragon waiting to get that green light to stow the crew arm for launch and arm the launch escape system. Once our LD gives the go-ahead, we should get a good view of the access arm moving away from the spacecraft. The range continues to be go for launch today, monitoring the clearance area surrounding our launch pad as well as the air and sea space along the flight corridor. If you're joining us on the Space Coast, you know it's about 85 degrees out with just a bit of a breeze, and we're hoping you are going to have a great view of launch today. And of course, as you heard earlier, overall weather is trending in the right direction, and we are currently tracking a 35 to 40% chance of weather violation at our target liftoff time. Our teams will continue to keep an eye on the weather.
Propellant load and launch for all operators in MCCX and Hangar X. Both control rooms will go into lockdown at T-minus 45 minutes and will remain in that state until the launch escape system is disarmed. All operators are to remain at their console, maintain a sterile cockpit until MD confirms successful disarmament of the launch escape system following orbit insertion or propellant offload. In the event of a scrub, stand by for hold and launch escape protocols. For non-urgent no-go conditions, brief the CE or LD and they will approve aborting the countdown. For urgent issues affecting the safety of the operation, operators shall call hold on the countdown net. Launch control will abort the launch auto-sequence and immediately proceed into the launch abort auto-sequence. At T-minus 10 seconds, launch control will be hands-off and relying on automated abort criteria for the remainder of the count. Operators advise the launch director whether structural breakup or fire is imminent or occurring per Dragon manual escape flight rules.
So with those instructions to our team, obviously we are moving forward. And as Shiva mentioned earlier, we are tracking that T-minus 45 pre-fueling weather briefing. Our biggest watch item, as Daryl mentioned earlier, is a few lingering rain and storm systems, but we do think we're going to have a good shot at launch today. Our teams, of course, will be staffed around the clock in mission control, which you've got a great view of on your screen there, to monitor Dragon not just today, but throughout the entire mission, from liftoff to Crew-9's arrival at the space station, all the way through splashdown when the astronauts return home early next year. On console and mission control, there are 6 key positions. The mission director, or MD, is in charge of the room and tasked with making real-time decisions to ensure mission success. The person that you've heard talking to the astronauts is the crew operations and resources engineer, who you'll hear us refer to as the core throughout the broadcast.
And launch control, at this time, you may proceed with arming the crew arm for movement. Launch control copies, arming now.
Good news that we're about to get that view of the crew arm moving away from Dragon. And we are moving ever closer to launch with just under 45 minutes to go.
Crew arm is armed for motion.
The 4 additional team members focused on vehicle systems in mission control include avionics, navigation and control, software, propulsion, life support, and communications with ground support teams. Apart from mission control,
crew access arm retraction has started.
Confirmation there. Oh, and a great view on your screen that crew access arm is moving away from Dragon on Slick 40 for the first time. Now, apart from mission control, our Falcon 9 team is currently located at the LLCC at Hangar X in Florida. With just about 44 minutes until our T0 today, all the teams are settling in for final checkouts, propellant loading, and for launch. We are expecting propellant loading to begin just in about 8.5 minutes here. So in the meantime, while we enjoy these great views, let's check back in with Daryl.
All right, thank you very much, Ronnie. As we've been watching the completion of that crew access arm retracting away from Dragon, big moment, big milestone. Talk to us about it, Zena.
Yeah, gosh, this is a really important milestone. So before we start actually loading propellant on the vehicle, we want to also arm the launch escape system so that if there were an issue with the rocket, even on the ground here on the pad, the crew have a safe way to escape and land safely. As Nick Hague has experienced firsthand, these systems are really, really
Dragon
important.
SpaceX, you are go for Section 6. Close visors and arm the launch escape system.
And Freedom copies, we're go, Section 6.
And there we go. We've got the go from Core in Mission Control Hawthorne for the crew to arm the launch escape system. The crew actually issue that command themselves from the display of Dragon.
SpaceX Freedom, visors are closed, and we are arming the launch escape system.
SpaceX copies.
All of these milestones moving towards the big one, which is tanking Falcon 9 with propellants, which would kick off at T-minus 35 minutes. A update on the weather from Launch Weather Officer Brian Cizik, who informs me that the probability of violation has now gone to 30%, reflecting a 70% go. The launch escape system is now verified armed, which means that the astronauts would, in the case of an emergency, exit off the top of the rocket through the launch escape system, carrying Dragon out to the Atlantic Ocean. But again, the weather is something that they are watching, but has been improving. We had some storm cells pass over the launch pad earlier, dumping a fair amount of rain on the area. But as you can see now, the sun, somewhat diffused through clouds, is shining brightly on Crew Dragon Freedom on top of a Falcon 9 rocket. And there's a lovely shot as well. We're getting some sunlight poking through the clouds. There is a storm system, another group of clouds and storms that's tracking on its way here. But according to Brian Cizik, it is not going to arrive before T0. And that's a great update and a great improvement in the weather scenario.
That's exactly right. Things are trending in a positive direction. I'm feeling optimistic. And of course, we want to make sure we have a good weather window before we give the final go to launch, but things are looking positive today.
That launch escape system, of course, there for an emergency. If there was a pad abort, Dragon would lift off either automatically, or if Nick Hague felt he needed to, he could, obviously you understand this as you're in training as a commander, could hit the abort and bring Dragon off the top of that rocket as well, taking it about 2.5 miles off the coast there to land in the ocean.
Yep, that's exactly right. Dragon and Falcon are very smart vehicles with excellent automation built in, and so that is the most likely scenario that would trigger a launch escape. But of course, the crew have the ability to trigger that manually using a handle that's just below the displays of the Dragon spacecraft, and actually certain ground operators can also trigger it remotely.
The launch escape system is powered by Super Draco engines capable of moving Dragon 1/2 mile in only 7.5 seconds, which is equivalent to a peak velocity of 436 miles per hour, something the astronauts would certainly feel.
Yes, absolutely. So you could expect in the case of a launch escape to experience some really high G loads. Those loads are going through the chest as opposed to vertically through your head, and so you would wind up feeling like someone extremely, extremely heavy, or 12 someone's extremely heavy, are sitting on your chest. This is something that we train for in centrifuges on the ground, and so, of course, you would be prepared if that needed to happen, but we're very grateful that these systems are there and available.
Did you ever chat with Nick about his emergency abort and what that felt like?
Absolutely, yeah, of course. This is something that
Very
Nick has
curious.
shared with
Right?
a lot of people. It's something that we are all curious about. It's a really unique thing. Not many people have experienced a abort like that. He said it was something that it happens before you really have a chance to think about it. The Soyuz, like Dragon, has a lot of automation built in, and so for his abort, the automated systems kicked in. But he said also your training really kicks in, and that's something that they train for in Soyuz as well. And so he felt well prepared to respond to that. All of the teams were in place, and he was collected safely after landing, brought back, and had the chance to launch again, actually not too much later. So this will be Nick Hague's second mission to the space station, but his third launch.
His third launch, indeed. As we watch now inside, looking at the Dragon Freedom, Nick Hague, Aleksandr Gorbunov in their seats, configured for launch, ready to go. Another interesting note about this flight, we were talking about the launch escape system, is this new capability that SpaceX has for emergency propulsive splashdown. It's the same system that we're talking about for launch escape system, but for prop splash, as they call it. It's amazing that this is there just in case there's a complete failure of the parachutes, where those Super Dracos would also fire, right?
That's right. Yeah, this is a really interesting capability. And of course, we have multiple parachutes on board the Dragon, and so this would be a backup to the backup in a
Tanks are
really
venting for the start of propellant load.
deep contingency case. But it's an amazing capability. The software has been built in, the plumbing has all been there from the start, but now we're actually flying with that software enabled, and of course we could unenable it if something changed in the configuration of that Dragon capsule.
Just another good backup to have as we encircle the launch complex there, Space Launch Complex 40, a historic first today, launching astronauts from this launch pad for the first time ever. T-minus 36 minutes and 20 seconds and counting, just a little over a minute away from propellant load, a big milestone on our way to launching today. T0 is 1:17 and 21 seconds p.m. Eastern Time. It is an instantaneous window. We have to go at that second or we don't go at all. And that's all because of the timing necessary to catch up to the International Space Station. It's the most efficient time of this day to launch there, using the least amount of propellant that you would have to otherwise. And propellant is needed for a lot of things. Get the astronauts up, and of course we're bringing this booster back as well.
Absolutely. Although we would like to think we are in charge, it's actually physics is the boss today.
Absolutely. Let's listen in now as they start up propellant load.
Propellant load has started.
There we go.
There we go. This is a big milestone today. You can see that crew access arm is retracted from the Dragon. That's because we now have the launch escape system armed. Loading propellant is a dynamic operation.
Very dynamic operation when you start flowing, kerosene, highly refined kerosene, and then a little bit later, liquid oxygen.
That's right, yeah. So we'll be starting to load the liquid oxygen on stage 1.
T-minus 34 minutes, 20 seconds in counting until liftoff of Crew-9. We've got them seated inside the SpaceX Dragon at the top of this rocket, spacecraft called Freedom. Aleksandr Gorbunov, the mission specialist. Nick Hague, the commander. Launch team is now preparing to continue the propellant load.
That's right. Yeah, a little over a minute ago, we heard the start of propellant load. We'll be starting with stage 1, then stage 2.
Skipping a little bit forward once they launch, get into space, and arrive at the ISS. They've got some incredible science that they will be doing. Here's a closer look at how we're getting that science done.
The International Space Station isn't just a symbol. It's a powerhouse of cutting-edge science, constantly revealing secrets that defy Earth's limitations and drive us farther into the cosmos.
Our mission is research and science. We have experiments mounted on the outside of the station that are looking at Earth. We study our own bodies and how they react to space, to weightlessness, to radiation, and that helps not only us go on further in future missions, but also helps for medical research back home. And then we study lots of different things as well, like materials, combustion, all sorts of things that help us understand life back on Earth.
Yeah! Microgravity doesn't play by the rules. It flips them upside down, transforming how liquids flow, how flames burn, and unraveling biological mysteries before our eyes.
I saw some heart tissues beating in space, and it was incredible.
So Tom, we see that top one beating. Looks like happy heart cells.
But we're not just along for the ride. We're explorers, diving headfirst into the challenge and harnessing the power of this unparalleled platform, just as we have been for decades. We're on a relentless quest for answers, seeking to understand the intricate workings of the human body in space and ensuring future crews stay safe on their daring journeys beyond Earth's orbit.
The human aspect of human space exploration is always going to be very important for decades to come.
And when it comes to technology, we're not waiting around. We're discovering new ways to grow crops in harsh environments and engineering innovations to tackle Earth's greatest challenges.
We have amazing technology that allows us to recycle water and create water for us to drink. It's delicious.
Microgravity isn't just a curiosity. It's a game changer in the fight against diseases back on Earth, paving the way for breakthroughs that benefit us all and enabling new economic opportunities in space.
Welcome Axiom 3 on board the International Space Station.
From our vantage point more than 200 miles above Earth, we are not just spectators. We're gaining unprecedented insights into the world we call home, and we're sharing our findings openly. We're not just achieving results today. We're sparking inspiration in future generations of explorers and embracing the power of global collaboration as we reach for the stars.
What was your favorite experiment on the International Space Station?
Toby, great question. My favorite experiment was the one that I got to eat. It was us growing hatch chili peppers in our plant habitat.
Station Huntsville on 2, we have video in Node 1. Look at those chili peppers.
And as we soar through space at 17,500 miles per hour, each moment is a step closer to unlocking the mysteries of our Earth, our universe, and propelling our pioneering spirit even farther into space. So come along for the ride aboard the International Space Station.
Well, you heard a moving and saw a moving tribute to the science that's going on board the
Startup Stage 1 cryo loading.
And there you heard the call out that we're now cryo-loading liquid oxygen into the Falcon 9 rocket. Another great milestone passed. T-minus 29 minutes and counting. And here's now more about the crew that's going into space today. U.S. Space Force Colonel Nick Hague is your Crew-9 commander. He was selected by NASA as an astronaut in 2013. This will be his second spaceflight to the International Space Station. In 2018, as we've mentioned, he and his Soyuz crewmate experienced a catastrophic rocket booster malfunction after launch. They were forced to abort but landed safely 5 months later. 5 months later, I should say, Hague launched on another Soyuz and served as flight engineer for Expeditions 59 and 60. He spent a total of 203 days in space and performed 3 spacewalks. The Kansas native is a test pilot and a distinguished graduate of the United States Air Force Academy. Nick spent 5 months in Iraq in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. He voluntarily transferred from the United States Air Force to the U.S. Space Force in 2021 and is an active colonel. His wife, Katie, is a retired U.S. Air Force colonel, and they have 2 sons. This is mission specialist Aleksandr Gorbunov's first flight to space ever. He studied engineering with qualifications in spacecraft in upper stages from the Moscow Aviation Institute. Gorbunov graduated from the military department with a specialty in operation and repair of aircraft, helicopters, and aircraft engines. Before his cosmonaut selection in 2018, he worked as an engineer for a rocket space corporation and helped support cargo spacecraft launches from the Baikonur Cosmodrome.
Aleksandr and Nick are an excellent pair. They've trained together for a long time alongside Stephanie Wilson and myself.
Highly trained and ready to go. T-minus 27 minutes and counting until liftoff. Let's head back out to NASA's Megan Cruz, who's joined now by NASA Administrator Bill Nelson and Deputy Administrator Pam Melroy.
I am, and it's so great to have them here at Florida always. You know, Administrator, the weather seems to be improving, so we're hopefully poised to send another 2 astronauts to the International Space Station, where, of course, you know, we've had American astronauts there continuously for over 20 years. Talk to us about how international partnerships really help with American ingenuity in space.
Well, first of all, it shows that we are looking beyond our borders because we need our friends out there in other countries, and they have contributed greatly to this program. So, for example, on the big rocket that's going to go to the moon, it has the European support module from the European Space Agency. On our space station, there were originally about 15 international partners. Mm-hmm. And the number of countries that have used the space station is upwards of plus 40. So it is very much an international space program, and that's why it's called the International Space Station.
And actually, I'm going to ask you one more question since we're talking about how the International Space Station is really a test bed for us as we return back to the moon, go farther to Mars. Let's talk about the Artemis II mission. Are there any updates for that as we look forward to sending 4 astronauts to orbit the moon?
Well, we are looking forward to the next flight, Artemis II. The crew has been named. Reed Wiseman is the commander. They're going to do everything in preparation for the 3rd Artemis, which will be the one that will go into lunar orbit hook up with a SpaceX lander, and we will have then the first woman and the next man will walk on the moon.
Yeah, something exciting to look forward to. Now, Deputy Administrator, let's go back and talk about Crew-9 now. So, we're launching with 2 empty seats. That's so NASA astronauts Butch, Wilmore, and Suni Williams can return with Nick and Aleksandr early next year. What have Butch and Suni been able to accomplish on the ISS since they got there in June?
Well, the good news is having 2 extra sets of hands means more than 80 hours a week of extra work that can go into critical science, but also maintaining the station. So they have really contributed. Crew time is really precious on orbit. It feels like there's never enough. Yeah. But I would like to highlight a couple of experiments that they have been working on that I think are exciting, both because of how they impact future spaceflight, but also people here on Earth. So the plant management, a water management experiment, which is testing different techniques for transporting water to plants. Now, in space, in microgravity, water doesn't flow the same way without gravity to take care of it. But what's interesting is not only will that help us when we go to the moon and we go on to Mars, the ability to grow our own plants, but it also affects hydroponic systems here on Earth. The other experiment that I think is really significant is looking at taking some tissue cultures of the bone marrow that creates platelets, right? Very important in our blood system. And they're going to grow them in cultures. And part of that is to look at blood clotting and how those cells develop and how it might work in space.
Right.
But it also is going to help us understand blood clots better here in gravity by being able to compare the two.
I know,
so they are
great
doing
experiments.
very significant science.
Yeah, it's always so great to have veteran astronauts there as well. All right, so let's head back over now to our commentators in Hawthorne, California. Thank you both.
Thank you, Megan. As we continue to count down, let's take a closer look at the vehicles that will be taking Crew-9 to the International Space Station today. Falcon 9 is a 2-stage rocket developed and manufactured by SpaceX, known for its safe, reliable, and cost-effective access to space. It's also the first and currently the only orbital-class rocket capable of reflight. Sitting at the top of Falcon 9, Dragon and its trunk stand over 26 feet tall. There are 2 windows on the spacecraft, plus 1 under the nose cone. The nose cone opens shortly after launch to expose the forward bulkhead thrusters and docking mechanism that will connect to the space station. Dragon's trunk holds solar cells, which power Dragon while it's in free flight. The trunk can also carry unpressurized cargo.
Dragon has 16 Draco thrusters that can be used in space to help navigate the spacecraft to its destination, each providing 90 pounds of force. That doesn't include the 8 Super Draco thrusters used for an abort, which are no longer active once the crew is in orbit.
Dragon has played a significant role in advancing our future in space by safely transporting crew to and from the space station. There's currently 4 Dragon spacecraft supporting human spaceflight missions that have docked to the station, and those are Endeavour, Resilience, Endurance, and Freedom. Designed to be the safest spacecraft ever flown, Dragon is capable of carrying up to 7 passengers to and from Earth orbit and beyond.
Crew-9 is SpaceX's 15th human spaceflight mission since 2020, when Dragon became the first private spacecraft to take humans to the International Space Station. Dragon has completed over 47 launches and flown 54 astronauts representing 14 countries. Throughout all of those missions, Dragon has helped support more than 1,000 experiments. Altogether, the reusable Dragon spacecraft have completed 8 human spaceflight missions on behalf of NASA and visited the station 42 times under NASA's commercial resupply and commercial crew programs.
And through all of that, Dragon has proven to be quite a versatile spacecraft. It can autonomously dock to the space station when outfitted with the ISS docking adapter, as it is for today's flight. When not going to the space station and in free flyer mode, the docking adapter can be swapped out for a cupola. Then, of course, you have our newest option, the Skywalker hardware, to support extravehicular activities, which the crew just used for the first time during Polaris Dawn. Continuing down the vehicle, we have the second stage. The second stage is powered by a single Merlin vacuum or MVAC engine, and this engine is optimized to perform in the vacuum of space. After stage separation, the MVAC will ignite and carry Dragon to its target orbit. The Falcon 9's first and second stages are connected by the black interstage, which houses the MVAC engine and the systems that decouple the 2 stages during stage separation. Below that, of course, is the first stage, which is powered by 9 Merlin engines. These 9 Merlin engines provide the initial thrust to lift Falcon 9 off the pad and clearing the tower through the lower, thicker parts of the Earth's atmosphere. Each of these 9 Merlin 1D engines delivers about 190,000 pounds of thrust at sea level, and that gives Falcon 9 a combined 1.7 million pounds of thrust.
After stage separation, Stage 1 will return to Earth for recovery and reuse on a future mission using a combination of the Merlin sea-level engines and the 4 titanium grid fins located near the top of the booster, which will guide it during its reentry and landing. The Falcon 9 first stage is also equipped with 4 landing legs that deploy just before landing to allow for a vertical touchdown on either a drone ship or a landing pad. And today, we'll be attempting to land this booster at Landing Zone 1 back at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. The second stage will power Dragon into its initial low Earth orbit before separating, leaving Dragon to continue its journey to the space station using its own thrusters. About 40 seconds after separation, Dragon's nose cone deploy sequence will begin, exposing the guidance navigation controls that help Dragon autonomously fly to the space station.
With T0 coming up in just under 20 minutes, our teams at the Cape are doing a series of system checks to ensure Dragon and Falcon 9 are ready for flight. So for now, let's check in with Ronnie for a quick status update.
Thanks, Atticus. We are still looking good for an on-time launch just under 20 minutes from now. Both Dragon and Falcon 9 continue to be healthy. As we continue to listen and watch the countdown, our teams are prepping the vehicle for flight. Propellant loading of both RP1 and liquid oxygen began at T-minus 35 minutes. We also heard the call out that the launch escape system is now armed. The launch escape system is designed to propel Dragon away from Falcon 9 in the event of an emergency during launch. The range, which is monitoring the keep-out zones, among other key flight requirements, also continues to report no issues, and they are go to support today's launch. As you heard earlier, weather is also looking good, and we are still tracking roughly a 30% chance of violation at our target liftoff time. But we are optimistic that we're going to have good conditions at that T0. Now, as a reminder, today we have an instantaneous launch window driven by our planned rendezvous point, the point at which Dragon and station will meet in orbit. The space station is currently orbiting the Earth at more than 17,000 miles per hour, and Dragon needs to catch up to it. That means we have to deliver Dragon to the correct orbit by timing its trajectory relative to the orbiting laboratory so that they are in the same place in space at the same time. A precise liftoff time is crucial for hitting that rendezvous point. Of course, that means that at this point, if we hear a hold for any reason, we'll have to stand down and target our backup opportunity, which is tomorrow at 12:54 Eastern Time. Now, with all systems go, I'm going to turn it over to Nilofer for a status update from Houston.
And thank you, Ronnie. Back here in the International Space Station Flight Control Room at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston, teams are continuing to work around the clock to monitor activities aboard the orbital outpost. Leading the team inside the room is Flight Director Nicole McElroy. The team in Mission Control Houston, the team in Hawthorne, and the astronauts aboard the space station will track the autonomous docking of Dragon Freedom on Sunday when they enter joint operations. This will happen when the spacecraft enters the approach ellipsoid, the invisible boundary that helps us monitor arriving and departing spacecraft. Once docked, Dragon Freedom's crew will perform a series of leak checks, then work to open the spacecraft's hatch before floating into the station to begin their 5-month stay. We anticipate that the hatch will be opened about an hour and a half after docking. When they enter the orbital outpost, Crew-9 will be greeted by the rest of their Expedition 72 crew and will come together for opening remarks. The anticipation for launch continues here in Mission Control. How's it looking on the Space Coast, Daryl?
Well, we're looking pretty good, Nilofer, and thank you very much. Weather improving here at the Kennedy Space Center. If you're just joining us, we are 16 minutes and 37 seconds away from the launch of the 9th astronaut rotation mission to the International Space Station under NASA's commercial
Stage 2 LOX load has started.
And there you heard Stage 2 LOX load has begun, the final loading of propellants into the Falcon 9 rocket. Commander Nick Hague and Mission Specialist Aleksandr Gorbunov are strapped into their seats inside Dragon Freedom. As you can see right there, the Falcon 9 rocket fueling operation well underway. The launch escape system is armed, And that means Dragon is prepared to launch itself away from the Falcon 9 in case of an emergency. So far, operations look and sound as expected, and we are counting down to liftoff at 1:17 and 21 seconds p.m. Eastern Time. And I want to welcome in a special guest here on set now. NASA astronaut Stephanie Wilson is here, joining us alongside Zena Cardman, both of you NASA astronauts. It is so good to have you both here. You both trained for Crew-9. This is where you probably expected to be on this day. But you have accepted this role of supporting your friends for launch. And as they get ready to launch with 15 minutes left to go, Stephanie, question for you. What is the mindset of the crew that you trained with? You've flown into space 3 times on the space shuttle. What's the mindset of the crew right now?
Well, thank you, Daryl, and thank you, Zena, for having me join you today. And yes, both Zena and I have trained for a year and a half with Nick and Alex. They have trained hard. They are well prepared. In this moment where they are strapped inside the vehicle with just the 2 of them, they are reviewing procedures. They have trained for this moment. They are ready to execute the mission. They are, of course, looking forward to the work that's ahead of them on the International Space Station. Perhaps a little bit sad to be leaving family and friends, but they'll be talking to them soon once they have docked to the International Space Station. But it's a moment to review all of the hard work that has gone into this moment in the preparation and to be ready to execute the mission, which they will do very well.
Speaking of hard work, you both trained for Crew-9 for a year and a half. And so from a human level, we know you are professional astronauts. Your seats were needed for Butch and Suni to bring them back. What was it like for you personally when you learned that you wouldn't be flying today, but you would be flying some other time, but not today?
Yeah, gosh, Daryl, I think I felt a lot of emotion when I saw Stephanie walking through the door there. It's bittersweet, but it's a really beautiful thing. I think any launch is a testament to the power of collaboration, and this launch maybe even more so than usual. I think from my perspective, it's a privilege and a choice to take part in something that's larger than yourself, and that's a choice that I make today and the next day and the next day. So in this moment, it's feeling exciting, it's feeling bittersweet, but for the most part, I'm feeling a lot of joy and pride in our space program, and so excited for our crew members, especially Aleksandr. This is his first launch to space. Nick, this will be his second mission to the International Space Station. It's going to be a beautiful day. And I think
for you, Steph?
Yes, very, very similar. I think that we all train together. Adaptability and flexibility is key as we look across our corps. You know, we all train for various roles, and we select people that can serve in various roles and can be seamlessly thrown into different roles. And excited for them. We're always excited for our colleagues to have an opportunity to launch into space. Of course, we wish we could be with them. We have trained with them for this time. We, of course, want to be together. We have built friendship and camaraderie and learned for the roles for the Crew Dragon and for the International Space Station. But I am very excited for them, looking forward to hearing their stories from space and for seeing them launch.
And that launch just 12 minutes away, a little over 12 and a half minutes away, the Falcon 9 rocket. Well, this is a booster that can be reused more than a few times with minimal maintenance. At the time that this launch happens, it will be flying over the International Space Station, will be flying 260 statute miles over northeast Bulgaria. Crew-9 will then spend the next 28 hours or so chasing down the International Space Station for a rendezvous currently targeted for September 29th at 5:30 p.m. And we'll have live coverage on NASA TV of docking, which will arrive when it does dock, about 2 hours before. And so I want to thank Stephanie Wilson for coming in and joining us. We really appreciate your time and being here. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. As we continue to count down, T-minus 11 minutes and 42 seconds and counting, getting close to terminal count. We want to commend both Stephanie Wilson and Zena Cardman for their professionalism and for their support of their fellow crew members and friends who are going up today.
That's absolutely right, Daryl. It's an exciting day to be here, and although 50% of us are staying on the ground this morning, we are part of this mission, this Crew-9 mission, and we're so proud to be part of the team that got this Dragon freedom Nick Hague and Aleksandr Gorbunov ready for flight today. Thinking about another minute or so, we'll hear the next expected call that the crew displays are configured for launch. We'll hopefully hear at that point some great words from our commander.
That's right. Nick Hague is going to have some words for us, so we're going to tune into that. And you and I will join Stephanie outside and watch your friends launch to space. In the meantime, let's send it out to SpaceX in California.
Dragon, SpaceX. Confirm crew displays are configured for launch.
So good news there from Mission Control. And our next major countdown event will be around the...
And SpaceX Freedom. We can confirm our displays are configured for launch. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank the entire team around the world for your hard work and dedication to get us to this point. Alex and I are ready and honored to represent you and everyone back on Earth. A huge thanks to our families and friends for your unwavering support, and to Crew-9, unbreakable. We go together.
SpaceX copies. You've proven you're ready, Dragon, and we're looking forward to seeing a full capsule at splashdown.
Really exciting commentary there from Commander Nick Hague. And with that, we are just about 9.5 minutes to launch. And right now, the Falcon 9 launch commit criteria are being checked by our onboard computers. Those launch commit criteria are specific thresholds and data that tell us that the rocket is healthy. There are many systems in place to ensure that the rocket and crew are both safe leading up to liftoff and during flight. And now that we're approaching terminal count, our teams are performing those final checks.
Just coming up on 9 minutes before launch right now, we just heard from Commander Nick Hague. He and Aleksandr Gorbunov are suited. They are seated in Dragon Freedom there, as you can see on the screen. We have teams here at Mission Control Hawthorne monitoring the vehicle, both Dragon and Falcon 9. Meanwhile, in Houston, as we heard from Nilofer, some of those teams in console positions are keeping tabs on the space station, its reboost capabilities, making sure everything is looking good for Dragon's arrival tomorrow. We're looking at about a 9-minute ride to orbit today, and that's the point that the second stage will cut off. After that, Dragon and the second stage will continue to coast for another few minutes, and then they will separate. You'll be hearing some performance calls as we get into this final countdown, and then after liftoff. These are SpaceX flight controllers reporting on trajectory, speed, booster performance, and other key milestones. And there are also some other calls you'll hear the crew make after liftoff. The crew will report out on a few number and letter combinations, and these mark different abort zones through the flight up the eastern seaboard. The first two are 1A and 1B, and these are available when the first stage is firing. The next are 2A through 2E. Those will come into play once the second stage kicks in, but we will only hear the call for 2A. Diverting a little bit from the other naming system, you will also hear the call Shannon, and that refers to Shannon, Ireland. That means the crew could target off the coast of Ireland if they needed to abort later in the second stage burn. Again, you'll hear these calls throughout the flight uphill, along with the key performance callouts from the guidance, navigation, and control officer, as well as the propulsion lead.
One of the next callouts we're listening for in our countdown is the announcement that Stage 1 engine chill has started, which is one of the key processes that prepares the engines on board our first stage for flight. Right now, propellant in the tanks is isolated from the engines, but at T-minus 7 minutes, we'll open the engine pre-valves and start passing just a trickle of liquid oxygen through the Merlin engine pumps, chilling those engines for the start sequence.
Stage 1 engine chill has started.
Confirmation there that engine chill has started. Now, we do this because the super chilled and densified liquid oxygen on board is really, really cold. So we use the process to bring that engine hardware down to a cooler temperature before flowing all of the LOX and propellant into it during flight. At liftoff, Falcon 9 is consuming 700 gallons of fuel per second. So engine chill helps us to prevent thermal shock and ensures nominal engine performance. The next thing we're listening in for is the confirmation that RP1 load has been completed on board Stage 1.
RP1 is that densified kerosene or rocket fuel that propels the crew into orbit. All of that RP1 is fully we are waiting to hear that it is fully loaded onto the rocket, and the second stage loading was completed earlier. So we're still loading liquid oxygen as well on the first and second stages.
Stage 1 fuel load is complete.
Confirmation right on time that RP1, the densified kerosene loading, is now complete. Again, still loading liquid oxygen on the first and second stages. We need this to combine with the densified kerosene. That RP1 liquid propellant needs an oxidizer to combine with in order to ignite. Coming up next at the 5-minute mark, we'll hear the call for Dragon to configure for terminal count and then transition over to internal power. And then we'll hear the propellant tanks on Falcon 9 are getting ready to pressurize, which means they'll have some additional rigidity and structural support for the rocket as we get ready for the strong back to retract. The strong back provides access to Falcon 9's fueling lines and umbilicals for both prop load and the different gases being loaded on board. The clamp arms will open and it'll move just a couple of degrees at first, and then we will see it swing open completely at the moment of liftoff. We'll continue to check through a couple more fueling milestones, including one around the 2-minute mark before flight, where we'll hear liquid oxygen loading is complete on the second stage.
Falcon 9 tanks are pressurizing for strong back retract.
Dragon in configure for terminal count.
Now under 5 minutes to launch, we are in terminal count, meaning the Dragon onboard computers take control of the spacecraft. Again, we are still watching first stage as its liquid oxygen loading continues. That'll be complete around 3 minutes, followed by completion of second stage liquid oxygen loading about 1 minute later.
Strong back retract has started.
Just heard that call out from mission control that strong back retract has started. And if we keep a close eye on the screen, there we go, just coming out of those clouds of liquid oxygen, we got to see those clamp arms opening up around stage 2. What's going to happen now is that our strong back will recline just about 2 degrees away from the vehicle. But the TE will throw back all the way to 45 degrees at liftoff, clearing the way for Falcon 9 to leave the pad. As Leah mentioned, that strong back does route the vehicle's fluid and telemetry lines all the way up to the rocket and our spacecraft today. Good views of the strong back moving away from Falcon 9 and Dragon there on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. With that, we are just about 30 seconds away from LOX load completion on board the first stage. As Ronnie mentioned, standing by just about 20 seconds from now, we're expecting to hear the liquid oxygen loading will finish. Again, this is required to combine with that RP1, the densified kerosene, to give us the chemical composition we need to propel the rocket into space. All of these white clouds of vapor you see on your screen are normal. We will continue to see them build as we get closer to launch, and that's due to this liquid oxygen. It's super chilled, so some of that does boil off in the hot Florida air.
Stage 1 LOX load is complete.
There's confirmation right on time.
Dragon in terminal count and on internal power.
That we both have LOX load complete on the stage 1 and that Dragon is on internal power. We are expecting LOX loading to last for just about another 30 seconds on board stage 2. And then we should see a vent down of the TE LOX lines. That's going to produce another one of those large white clouds moving away from the vehicle. Again, as Leah just mentioned, that is totally normal and happens when that cooler liquid oxygen that's venting off the surface of the tanks comes into contact with that humid Florida air along the Space Coast.
We're standing by now for stage 2 liquid oxygen loading to be complete.
Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
Dragon in auto idle.
With confirmation of that liquid oxygen load complete, gas closeout has
started. Expect loud venting.
Right on time, that gas closeout has begun. So we are now isolating all the feed lines for the different gas systems from the Falcon 9 rocket. Those will then get vented overboard through the umbilicals and the strong back itself. And you can actually hear that venting right now. Now, something else you'll see is our sound suppression technique. Our rockets are super loud, and that sound can impart pressure loads back on the rocket itself. So just before liftoff, you'll see a ton of water dumping onto the pad. This absorbs and prevents the sound from hitting the structure and reverberating back onto the rocket, which could cause
FDS is
damage.
armed. Falcon 9 is in startup and is now controlling.
Dragon in countdown.
Now that we are in countdown, the flight computer on Dragon will switch to countdown mode. And we've also heard the flight termination system is armed.
Go for launch.
Freedom is go for launch.
That's our final go for launch. SpaceX reporting go and the crew reporting go.
30 seconds.
Standing by for the first launch of humans from Space Launch Complex 40.
7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition. Ignition full power. And liftoff. Crew-9. Go SpaceX. Go Falcon. Go NASA.
Liftoff of Crew-9 now soaring to the International Space Station.
Stage 1 Alpha.
Stage 1 propulsion is nominal. Copy 1 Alpha.
Those 9 Merlin engines now providing 1.7 million pounds of thrust, propelling Falcon 9 and Crew 9 and continuing to get good calls from teams here on the ground.
Of course, these incredible views mean we are just a little bit past 30 minutes or 30 seconds into our 9th rotational crew mission.
Power telemetry nominal.
On board Dragon and Falcon 9 with good callouts from mission control that everything is looking good. With that, stage 1 is throttling down to pass through max Q, which is the period of maximum dynamic pressure on Falcon 9 during ascent.
Max Q.
Confirmation of max Q.
Vehicle is supersonic.
And that Falcon 9 is now traveling faster than the speed of sound.
Stage 1 throttle up.
Stage 1 Bravo.
Copy 1 Bravo.
That call out for 1 Bravo means we're in the second and final abort mode for the first stage and continuing to get good performance.
And vac chill is underway.
Crew is pulling just over 2 Gs at this point. Next up, we heard the engine chill on the second stage MVAC engine has begun, and then we will have MECO, or main engine cutoff, where the 9 engines on the first stage will cut off ahead of the first and the second stages, and then will separate from one another. Then that single Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage will ignite and continue to carry Crew 9 to orbit while the first stage begins its journey back to Earth. Two minutes in, and the crew is now traveling over 2,600 miles per hour.
Stage 1 is throttling down.
Confirmation there from mission control that stage 1 is throttling down as we prepare for main engine cutoff, followed shortly thereafter by stage separation and second engine start 1. You did hear mission control out that we are chilling our... There's confirmation of MECO.
Stage separation confirmed.
Stage 2 Alpha.
And back ignition. Copy 2 Alpha.
With that, we have had confirmation of MECO, stage SEP, and the ignition of our MVAC engine on board stage 2. Our next major milestone is going to be the beginning of stage 1 boost back burn, which is expected in just a couple of seconds here. Of course, if you are just joining us, you've got views of our first stage on the left-hand side of your screen and of MVAC burning with our Crew 9 astronauts aboard up in space on the right-hand side of your screen.
Now we are coming up on 3 minutes and 20 seconds since liftoff today, traveling over 4,000 miles per hour and 76 miles downrange.
As our first stage makes its way back to Earth, we are tracking a landing attempt today at landing zone 1, not too far from where we lifted off in Cape Canaveral, Florida.
Dragon, SpaceX, nominal trajectory.
Confirmation there that both vehicles
nominal trajectory.
are on nominal trajectories. Everything is looking good.
And we're getting good performance on that single Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage. The crew's G-load dips right now. We are going to prepare to hit the separation event. Right now they're about 1 G, which is about what we're used to experiencing on Earth. Crew's traveling almost 5,000 miles per hour now and 105 miles in altitude.
As we await the entry burn for our first stage, you are getting great views of it on the left-hand side of your screen. You can also see 2 of our titanium grid fins, which are the primary mechanical structures.
Dragon, SpaceX, nominal trajectory.
Confirmation there from Mission Control that everything is still looking good.
Freedom copies, nominal trajectory.
Now, as I mentioned, those grid fins are the primary mechanical structures that we use to steer the booster back toward its landing zone, which today is LZ-1 at Cape Canaveral. Just as kind of a quick point of reference, those grid fins are about 4 by 5 feet, so roughly the size of a coffee table. Getting our first tracking shots of the booster on its way back to Earth. Again, we are tracking the first stage on the left-hand side of your screen and MVAC up in space on the right.
And we do continue to hear good calls for that second stage. Again, we will see this continue to fire until close to 9 minutes into the flight, now at 5 minutes and 45 seconds since liftoff today. This is accelerating Dragon to more than 17,000.
Nominal trajectory.
More good news.
Freedom copies, nominal trajectory.
This second stage is bringing Dragon to more than 17,000 miles per hour. That puts our crew in orbit. And the single Merlin vacuum engine can produce over 220,000 pounds of thrust in the vacuum of space.
Stage 1 does perform 3 burns on its way back to Earth. The first is the boost back burn, followed shortly thereafter by the entry burn. The entry burn is used by Falcon 9 to slow the vehicle down before it reaches the denser parts of the Earth's atmosphere.
Dragon, SpaceX, nominal trajectory.
Nominal trajectory is there from Mission Control.
Freedom copies, nominal trajectory.
That entry burn is, of course, followed by the landing burn, during which time we'll light 3 of the Merlin engines on board the first stage. And we expect to see that landing burn just about a minute before we expect Dragon to be inserted into orbit. So we have 2 very exciting phases of flight, both for our first stage and our Crew-9 astronauts happening here at the same time.
Stage 2, FTX has based.
So a great touchdown of stage 1 there just a second ago. And now, of course, we are continuing to follow our Crew-9 astronauts on their way to space.
And we continue to get good calls for this second stage, that Merlin vacuum engine continuing to fire and propel our crew, now moving over 12,600 miles per hour and 611 miles downrange. Just over 8 minutes since liftoff today, so we are expecting to see this continue to fire until just about the 9-minute mark, at which point this engine will cut off. And of course, Dragon will coast for a few minutes, still attached to the second stage.
Shannon.
That call.
Copy, Shannon.
That call is for Shannon, Ireland. That would be the abort zone if we were to abort at this point in the flight. However, we are continuing to hear good calls about Dragon's performance.
MVAC shutdown.
Confirmation of the Merlin vacuum engine shutting down.
Dragon, SpaceX, nominal orbit insertion.
Good news there from
And Freedom copies, nominal orbital insertion.
From Mission Control and our crew that we have had nominal
Dragon,
orbit insertion.
SpaceX, launch escape system disarmed.
Freedom copies, LES disarmed.
In 9 quick minutes, we now have 2 new crew members on their way to the International Space Station, having taken off from Space Launch Complex 40. The crew now being in a good or expected orbit. We'll continue to coast for these few minutes, and then we get our first views inside the capsule of our 2 crew members, Nick Hague and Aleksandr Gorbunov. They are just continuing to stay in their suits and in their seats during this dynamic portion of the flight. We're going to continue to coast for a few minutes after this second stage engine cutoff. This allows the rates and motion from that long burn to settle out. There are some small reaction thrusters on the upper stage or the upper part of the second stage that can be used to counteract any residual motion. That basically makes sure we're in a stable coast before Dragon separates from Falcon, and that'll happen about 12 minutes into the flight. So about a minute and a half from now, we expect to see Dragon actually separating from the second stage. Again, we did hear the crew has been successfully inserted into a good orbit. And again, this is them now in microgravity, one of them, Aleksandr Gorbunov, for the very first time.
So as Leah mentioned, we are now just a few minutes away from the separation of Dragon from stage 2, during which time a number of activation checkouts occur. Automatically, first we're going to be checking out 12 of the Draco maneuvering thrusters, all around the service section of the Dragon spacecraft. We're also, of course, going to get ready for that nose cone opening, which will allow Dragon to dock with the International Space Station about 28 hours from now. The nose cone stays closed for the flight uphill to help protect against all of the guidance, navigation, and control sensors and Dragon's docking adapter. It's also covering 4 of our Draco thrusters that will be used for the majority of different phasing burns required as Dragon chases down the space station. We are currently standing by for that separation, which could happen anytime in the next couple of minutes.
Currently, you can see the crew is just relaxing in their seats. They are definitely vigilant, though. They are able to monitor those crew displays in front of them, keep up with what's going on in the mission. They could take control if they needed to. However, it's been a seamless ride to space today.
Good views there, looking up into Dragon's trunk, looking at the heat shield on the bottom of Dragon that Crew-9 will use when it returns home early next year.
Dragon, SpaceX, Dragon separation confirmed.
There.
And Freedom copies, good separation.
There you heard from Mission Control. Both
Dragon, Chief Engineer on Countdown 1. Nick, Alex, on behalf of the entire team, we thank you for flying with Falcon 9 today and wish you a great mission.
And Freedom, this launch director on Countdown. On behalf of the entire SpaceX launch and recovery team, I'd like to extend our congratulations to the entire Crew-9 team. Zena, Stephanie, Nick, Alex, Butch, and Suni. It's an honor to be a part of this mission with all of you. I'd also like to give a shout out to the Falcon 9 Crew-9 combo. The best bundle in the league, baby. Godspeed, Crew-9.
Couldn't say it any better. Thank you, guys. You know, we had the opportunity to meet so many people that were involved with the Falcon 9, and along the way was a sweet ride. I'm pretty sure my youngest son would say it was Sigma. Alex has got a few words to add as well.
And all the entities that made this launch possible. Roscosmos, NASA, Big SpaceX. And thank you to my family and friends for their support. And also I'd like to express my gratitude to the hundreds of thousands of people around the Хочу сказать спасибо Роскосмосу, НАСА совместно со SpaceX за успешный запуск человека на орбиту, за очередной успешный запуск, и также поблагодарить родных и близких за поддержку. Спасибо.
Incredible words from our commander and great views of Dragon up in orbit on your screen right now.
It's been about 14 minutes and 30 seconds since coming up on 15 minutes now since liftoff today. You got a quick look inside the capsule.
Dragon SpaceX, we had a nominal dehumidifier activation and service section Draco checkouts. Nose cone deploy is in progress.
And Freedom copies all. Thank you.
Confirmation there that our nose cone deploy is underway. That means that the 6 hooks that hold the nose cone in place during launch and the ascent portions of flight have begun to retract. That will allow the nose cone to start to swing open and deploy. That will uncover a number of critical systems for the flight up to the space station, including the forward bulkhead thrusters and the docking hatch. Incredible views from our crew up in space on your screen right now, but I'm sure it's nothing compared to the view out of Dragon's window as they make their way to the space station.
I can only imagine. And that journey to the space station will take about 28 hours, so they won't arrive until tomorrow afternoon. In the meantime, they will have the opportunity to get out of their suits, to get out of their seats as well, and kind of just enjoy the ride. They're going to shift into some off-duty time. That allows them to prepare any food that they would want to. That allows them to maybe even call down to the ground. They will also obviously get some sleep before a really big day tomorrow, monitoring the arrival and docking to the International Space Station. Of course, we're going to cover all of that live. I'm really looking forward to seeing 2 more crew members float into the orbiting laboratory. And if you're just joining us, we did lift off now at 16 minutes and 29 seconds ago. That was right on time at 1:17 p.m. Eastern Time from Space Launch Complex 40 down at the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. We have 2 members on board Dragon today. That's NASA astronaut Nick Hague, who's serving as the commander, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Aleksandr Gorbunov, who's making his very first flight to space. Once they arrive at the International Space Station tomorrow afternoon, they will be joining 9 other crew members on orbit. They'll be up there for about a week. A week is probably the best guess until the Crew-9 team. It is time for that crew to come home. Of course, they launched about 7 months ago at this point, and they will undock after they have completed a handover period with the Crew-9 crew, bringing them up to speed on everything that they've been working on for the last 7 months in orbit. So once they depart, we'll be back down to our typical approximately 7 people living and working aboard the International Space Station.
We are getting really spectacular views from up in space today. Shot there of our MVAC engine. We did get confirmation several minutes ago of SES-1.
We know that nose cone opening is underway as well. Those are a series of hooks and latches that allow the nose cone to open. And that nose cone is closed during launch to protect the docking hatch, to protect 4 bulkhead thrusters that we will use for some of the larger burns that help us get to the International Space Station.
One of the other things we're doing right now is going ahead and opening the ECLSS system, which stands for the Environmental Control and Life Support System, which will be activated inside of Dragon. As Leah mentioned earlier, soon our crew will be able to get their visors open and get out of their spacesuits and settle in for that 28-hour ride to the International Space Station. Good views there of the opening of Dragon's nose cone on the left-hand side of your screen. And coming up on 19 minutes since liftoff today, the crew, again, had a good orbital insertion, and that actually puts 14 people currently in low Earth orbit. That includes those living on the International Space Station right now, as well as those living on the Chinese space station. So a total of 14 humans are now not off the planet, but rather orbiting around it. More good views from our Dragon nose cone on the left-hand side of your screen. As it very gradually swings open, obviously in space, everything we do has an equal and opposite reaction, so slow and steady really wins the race here. Again, now 20 minutes since liftoff today. Dragon is flying free from the second stage, and it looks like they're about to enter an orbital nighttime. So now that they're at orbital velocity, that's 17,500 miles per hour, they are going to see 16 sunrises and sunsets a day. Again, it was an on-time liftoff at 1:17 p.m. Eastern Time from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida, and a clean ride uphill. We've had some good communication from Mission Control up to our Crew-9 astronauts already today. One of the things you may hear every time we communicate with the crew is a slight beep beforehand. That's called a Quindar tone, and actually dates all the way back to the early days of human spaceflight, and is effectively a radio signal indicating that we're communicating between the crew in orbit and our Mission Control team on the ground. We now have views back inside the capsule.
Dragon SpaceX, we have a nominal nose cone opening. We do have just about 3 minutes here left in the ground station pass if you've got any fluffy stowaways you'd like to introduce.
And Freedom copies, good Draco checkout, good nose cone opening. And I just so happen to have a furry friend with me. Yeah, SpaceX Freedom. So yeah, I've got a little Falcon here. I love the package of Falcon 9, Crew-9. Yeah, we've got a Falcon on board with us. This one's a multi-flyer though. Was on my first flight with Aleksandr and I, and with Aleksandr and I and Christina, and now me and Alex. So say hello to Aurora.
And we see your Dragon, actually a good view right now because we're looking at the display cam. And Dragon delayed call, but nominal TCS reconfiguration as well as forward bulkhead Draco checkouts.
And Freedom copies, good TCS, good Draco checkouts.
Spectacular views of our Crew-9 astronauts and zero-G indicator up in orbit. Human spaceflight has come so far in the last 5 years with Dragon. Since Demo 2 in May of 2020, SpaceX's Dragon fleet has launched a total of 54 crew members to space. 34 on behalf of NASA and their partners, and 20 commercial astronauts, including the first 2 all-civilian missions to space and the first 3 all-private passenger missions to the International Space Station.
In addition to flying people, excuse me, SpaceX's Dragon spacecraft also enables researchers the opportunity to fly critical science to orbit. And that's just like what we saw with the 3 investigations that NASA's Human Research Program flew on Polaris Dawn. So far, SpaceX and Dragon have carried over 1,000 research experiments to and from low Earth orbit, both to the International Space Station and on our free flyer missions as well.
From DNA sequencing to 3D printing, studies enabled by Dragon and the International Space Station test a variety of technologies, systems, and materials that will be needed for future long-duration exploration missions. Every mission yields critical research and learnings that help make life both on Earth and in space better. And flights like today's help us continue to lay this foundation for our future among the stars and continue our mission to make life multiplanetary.
But for now, we'll be signing off from SpaceX, and we're going to send you back over to NASA. But before we go, we do want to thank NASA for entrusting us with today's mission. And of course, thank you to all of the viewers for being here with us today.
Yeah, it was a really special mission. It was fantastic to see now 2 new crew members in orbit and on the way to the International Space Station. So with that, we're going to end our coverage from Hawthorne until we pick back up with our docking coverage in about 26 hours. So for now, we're going to send it back to you, Zena and Daryl at Kennedy Space Center to wrap up today's launch coverage.
Thank you very much, Leah and Atticus, and welcome back here to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, where just about 25 minutes ago, we watched Crew-9 lift off from Space Launch Complex 40 for the first time with humans at the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. NASA astronaut Nick Hague and Roscosmos cosmonaut Aleksandr Gorbunov are now en route to the International Space Station. I'm Daryl Dale, and this is NASA astronaut Zena Cardman, who has been with us for the past 4 hours, documenting Crew-9's path from astronaut crew quarters, suiting up all the way to the rocket, lifting off, and then getting into space today. And I got to watch it with Zena in this role. I get to watch oftentimes as we break, go outside and watch a launch with the astronaut. And in this particular case, Zena, with you being the commander from the beginning and then giving up your seat, you and fellow astronaut Stephanie Wilson, so that those seats could be used by Butch, Wilmore, and Suni Williams to come back. This has a very close association to you, clearly. What was your reaction there when you were watching them lift off into space?
Yeah, Daryl, I think every crewed launch that I have ever watched has really brought me a lot of emotion. This one today was especially unique. I think it was hard not to watch that rocket lift off without thinking, that's my rocket and that's my crew. But I also know that I'm not the only person who can think that. Of course, we have Stephanie Wilson here today, but I mean there are many, many people who made this mission happen, and there are people on orbit who will be taking this capsule home. And it makes me very proud to know that I am one of many people who can say, that's my crew, that's my rocket. Makes me really proud, makes me feel very connected to this mission that we all get to take part of. Go Crew-9.
Well said, Zena. And an emotional moment in time out there watching the rocket lift off. And now the work begins. You will start training for the next mission. You spent 1.5 years training for this one. You're now going to go into space at some point. What does the future hold for you at this point?
Yeah, it's a little bit to be determined. We've got a lot of exciting things ahead. I'm looking forward to starting training again at some point. And in the meantime, I can't wait to watch Nick and Aleksandr and the entire Expedition 72 crew really get to work and execute that mission that we all have worked so hard to make possible.
Yeah, and Nick and Aleksandr will become part of Expedition 72, as you mentioned, when they arrive on Space Station. NASA's Megan Cruz has joined us now with Jennifer Buckley, the chief scientist for the ISS program, with more about the science that's happening on board for Expedition 72. Megan.
Yeah, it's great to have Jen here. And Jen, you know, obviously we saw some changes through the mission, most notably the change from a 4 to a 2-person crew. Did any changes affect the science?
Well, the human research is specific to the crew member. So Butch and Suni have their science complement that will stay with them. But other than that, we didn't have to adjust our science plans. Butch and Suni are experienced crew members, so they jumped right in and have been helping us already with science on board, and we were able to keep our plan complement.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I know Expedition 72, they're going to be responsible for making a repair on the NICER instrument on the space station. Can you tell us about that instrument, its significance?
That's right. So NICER is an X-ray telescope that's mounted outside of the International Space Station, and it takes a look at neutron stars. Neutron stars are born from the cinders of a supernova event. They are the leftover material that then form neutron stars, and they're going to be repairing a light leak that occurred in May of 2023, which gave us some degraded detectors on that instrument.
Okay, gotcha. And so that's what we're fixing so that hopefully it works tip-top shape?
That's right. So right now with the damage, we still get full data during darkness. However, during sunlight, it degrades the data that we're able to get. And so when they do that repair in December, we'll bring NICER back up to its full capability.
Oh, perfect. Okay, well, obviously we as NASA look out into the universe, but also we look back at our own Earth. And for those who don't know, one way that we do that and look at our Earth is we have our astronauts take photos from the International Space Station. And I was told that more photos were taken from the ISS of Earth in the last 6 months than all of 2023.
That's right. So in the first 6 months of 2024, they took over 330,000 photographs.
Oh my gosh.
So, you know, this photography, apart from being absolutely beautiful, is really important science imagery. As you mentioned before, this allows us to take a look at our planet, and we can see how it's changing over time, as well as any environmental impacts. We also support the Disaster Response Network. So we're able to look at natural disasters like wildfires or even hurricanes. So we were involved in taking some imagery of Hurricane Helene as well, and we support other government agencies and provide that data.
Yeah, it's always so important to talk about, yes, the work that we do as we look out into the universe, but also as we reflect here on Earth and see what we can do to improve things for everyone. So Jen, thank you so much. Thanks for detailing the science for us. We'll send it back to our folks there.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Megan, and good to be back with you here with NASA astronaut Zena Cardman. We are wrapping up our coverage for today after a successful launch of Crew-9. But before we do, I want to know if you take one more social question.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Let's put it up for us. This is, let's see, Maya, age 10, asks, I want to know, because I want to work there, how is it to work at NASA? I want to be an aerospace engineer when I grow up.
That is awesome. Maya, we can't wait to have you in the NASA family. It's an amazing place to work. I love working in spaceflight, human spaceflight especially, and there are so many different types of people with different backgrounds who work. I love that we can all come together for this common goal coming from such different backgrounds. So all you've got to do is apply, and we'll see you soon.
As a young girl yourself, you probably never imagined that you would be here.
I sure did not.
And you made it happen as well.
That's right. Myself, but most especially all of the mentors and family and friends who made me who I am. Takes a team. Well said, Zena. Now, as we wrap things up, we want to let you know that though our coverage is coming to a close, you can still follow along with Crew-9's entire journey to the station by listening to the mission real-time audio commentary. Just to do that, you can snap that QR code that you see on the screen there, or if you're watching us on your phone, just screen grab it and you can click on it later. Nick and Aleksandr are on course to arrive at the International Space Station around 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Sunday, September 29th. On-camera coverage of docking and arrival will resume about 2 hours before that happens on NASA Plus. And, of course, that's always a big moment when the crew arrives, you know, especially not just for the people who are going there, that's their destination, but for the people who get to see them as well. Absolutely. It's a really joyful moment. I love few things more than I love watching astronauts fresh through that hatch, hugging each other and welcoming their new crewmates. It's an amazing thing to see. And there's 3 of them if you count this little guy right here, which you brought on board. That's right. This was the zero-G indicator. That's exactly right, and I absolutely love the history that this zero-G indicator has for Nick Hague specifically, and I'm sure Alexei Ovchinin will be happy to be reunited with that zero-G indicator as well. So getting the band back together.
Seems like it's a good luck charm at this point.
It seems that way.
All right. Well, Zena, I want to thank you for co-hosting with me today. Yeah, I know it was a challenge. It was emotional at times, but thank you for sharing your insight, your experiences, your knowledge, but most of all, your heart. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Daryl. Go Crew-9.
Go Crew-9. All right, with that, we're going to wrap it up and wish you a great day. An important reminder, though, about an upcoming launch in a few weeks here at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida on October 10th at 12:31 p.m. Europa Clipper is scheduled to lift off aboard a SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket on its 5.5-year journey to Jupiter's moon, Europa. You can watch it live right here on NASA Plus starting at 11:30 a.m. Again, huge thanks to all of our guests, for everyone who joined us today. But most importantly, we appreciate you for being here and watching. You can keep up with any Crew-9 updates to the mission using the online resources you see on your screen now. For everyone here at NASA and SpaceX, have a great rest of the day. We'll look forward to seeing you again soon. But we leave you now with a moment looking back at the highlights from suit up to liftoff.
And so it's great to see Nick Hague and Aleksandr Gorbunov here in suits that are looking good.
There's Shannon Walker with the two crew members laying out the rules to a card game. Crew-9 leaving the suit-up room and now on the move inside astronaut crew quarters. Nick Hague, commander of Crew-9, with his crewmate Aleksandr Gorbunov.
So they'll have a chance here to say a few words with those who are closest to them.
This will begin a roughly 20-minute drive with a full security escort across NASA's Kennedy Space Center.
You can see them doing the SpaceX flight suit lean back.
Walking the crew access arm.
Crew have ingressed the capsule.
Side hatch is closed.
3, 2, 1, ignition. Full power. And liftoff. Crew-9. Go SpaceX. Go Falcon. Go NASA.
Liftoff of Crew-9 now soaring to the International Space Station.
1 Alpha.
6 nominal. Copy, 1 Alpha.
Those 9 Merlin engines now providing 1.7 million pounds of thrust, propelling Falcon 9 and Crew-9 and continuing to get good calls from teams here on the ground.